Greetings, everyone. Good evening, good evening, good evening. I am calling to order the meeting of the City of Salem Budget Committee for January the 15th, 2025. And will the recorder please call the roll?
Member Belasheks.
Present.
Member Cohen.
Present.
Member Allen.
Also present.
Member Manville.
Here.
Member Vieira Brandel.
Present.
Member Tigan.
Present.
Member Matthews.
Here.
Member Gwen.
Here.
Member Hoy.
Here.
Member Nordyke.
Present.
Member Varney.
Here.
Member Dixon.
Here.
Member Curtis.
Here.
Member Geyer.
Here.
Vice Chair Nishioka.
Here.
Chair Brown.
Present. Will everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I do want to greet everyone tonight and Happy New Year. I think this is the first time we've come together as one in the space, so it's good to see all the bright, shining faces, and of course to everyone here that decided to join us tonight. Thank you for just being here, and those who are watching online. Again, we just thank you for being in this space with us and sharing your concerns and, of course, asking questions later on and throughout the meeting. So again, it's good to see everyone. We have an additions agenda that was provided earlier this afternoon, which included testimony and information reports. It is also at your desk. And can I get a motion to approve the additions to the agenda?
Motion to approve.
I have a motion by Gwen and a second by Member Varney. Is there any discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, please signify by saying nay. Seeing none, the motion passes. It's now time for public testimony. We will begin tonight with public comment. We will start with public comment for those who are attending in person, and then we will switch to anyone who is signed up virtually. For members of the public who have signed to testify, we would ask that you would please provide your name, your neighborhood, or your ward. You will have approximately 3 minutes to testify before this committee. You'll have the privilege to stand at that podium or at that podium. When the orange light starts flashing, you will have 1 minute that will remain. When the red light appears, we would ask that you please end your testimony. Press the button on the microphone at the podium before speaking. The green light means the mic is on, and the first person signed up to speak First person to speak tonight is Mr. Mike, is it Clur? Please go ahead.
Thanks. Good evening, Mayor, City Manager, Mr. Brown, council members. I'm representing myself, and I am from Center 50 Plus. This is a personal experience and perspective. I've cut this down from 2 hours to 3 minutes. With a lot of help from my gym wife, Phyllis. From my personal perspective, the benefits of Center 50 Plus, destination for seniors daily, health and fitness training, expert instructors, unwavering positive attitudes, genuine interest in students, music training, hobbies, social events, tax day, driver's license day, every other thing that you can think of, planned events, Meals on Wheels, camaraderie, social groups. That's how I met Phyllis. demonstrate the new and everlasting friendships, exceptional volunteer staff, and their uplifting smiles and spirits. The ratio of very few paid staff and a large number of fantastic volunteers. Reputation. Center 50 Plus is well known in much of the state for its diversity and extensive, broad-reaching programs enriching its members' lives. My OHSU doctor sent me to physical therapy, and my physical therapist, after 1 year of treatment, my physical therapist sent me to Center 50 Plus for Tai Chi to continue my therapy and recovery. He was extremely impressed with my therapy and recovery as a result of Center 50 Plus Tai Chi, and he asked me to give him a demonstration, so I did. I put on a little Tai Chi show for him. My OHSU doctor now knows that in addition to Tai Chi, I'm now enjoying 8 classes a week and physical work. It is like getting up and going to work every morning with my gym wife. We enjoy Tai Chi, yoga, and aerobics with weights. It's part of my life. I could not live without it. The Center 50 Plus is well known for its qualities and excellent facilities as compared to other centers in the state. Center 50 Plus is the gold standard. Do not consider closing the facility. Do not consider reducing the rich environment. Reconsider the fees charged for access to the programs. Consider more strenuous accountability for members registering for daily program attendance. Compare the center to other city facilities for productivity. Consider making the Center 50 Plus a destination for all Salem seniors by targeted advertising. Center 50 Plus is a diamond in the crown of Oregon's capital city. It is the pride of its citizens. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next, we will have, I believe it's Steve Zugio. And please forgive me if I am mispronouncing your name.
Good evening, everyone. It's definitely a pleasure to be here. The importance of mental
And sir, would you mind stating your name and your ward or neighborhood, please?
Oh, Steve Zuger, and I'm here on behalf of Center 50 and representing myself. So anyway, the importance of mental and physical health and well-being, it cannot be ignored or overlooked. It's something that cannot be taken for granted. It's the lifeblood of all of us. And if our mental health goes down, it's no matter of time before it drags our physical health down with it. There's many ways to a healthy mind and body, many, many, many ways. But one of the places that we can go to help is Center 50 Plus. Now, the Center 50 is not a clinic. It doesn't pretend to be something it's not, but it's a very fantastic thing because if you really stop to think about it, you've got a clinic here and you've got Center 50 here. They have a lot alike. They have the same identical trajectory and the same end goal of mental health, rehabilitation, nurturing, and all the good things with it. And it has the very end goal of making us a better person mentally and physically. The Center 50 is an amazing place. If you really stop to look at it, for those who have ever driven by, it's not just a brick and mortar container of electrical and plumbing. It's got an amazing place, absolutely. If you go into the cafeteria on any one given day, you can hear a lot of conversations about any subject under the sun. And the thing is that it's like a think tank, and it's a crossroads of Salem. And there's a lot of buzz that goes on in there, and who knows how many great ideas came from there that have leached out in the city and made our community a better place. It's an amazing place. And it's a relationship absolutely worth preserving. When you go into the front door, you got a travel agency off to your left, a check-in desk, a gift shop, a lounge where people bring dogs in for pet therapy. And then you got a cafeteria, which is an amazing place. Upstairs, you've got the facility for mental and physical health and well-being in the form of gym equipment, and it goes from there. So there's a lot that goes on there, classes, you name it. It's just a very vital place. And it is kind of, and if you really stop to think about it, it's like a crossroads of our city. And everybody has been in there, it seems like. There's every walks of life. Everybody there is represented in their lunchroom and all the other places there. It's an amazing, amazing place. And it is a relationship that's very well worth preserving. So I don't know where the budget cuts are going to come from, how deep that knife is going to be, but
Sir,
yes.
thank you for your testimony.
Oh, you're welcome. Have a good day.
Next, we have Elizabeth Kaiser. And please say your name and your neighborhood award.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Kaiser. I live in the Englewood neighborhood, and I'm here to represent 50 Plus. I've been a member for 5 or 6 years. And every time I walk through that door and see that fireplace and am welcomed by the volunteers, I feel better. If I'm depressed, it is a great place to go, and I feel even better when I leave after a yoga class or a Tai Chi class or a Tone Your Bones class, and I feel like I have gained so much strength physically, and I have made so many friends there. Some of them are behind me here. I have a list of names at home of 40 people that I have met in my classes or among the volunteers or the administration, and I consider them all my friends. And I want to say a word about something that has not been mentioned. They have a wonderful program for people suffering from Alzheimer's and their caregivers. My best friend was a member of that program, Virginia Furtwängler. Some of you may even know her because she seemed to know everybody in Salem. But her husband took her there for the last 6 months or so before she had to be placed in an institution. And every time I talked to them, they just raved about the wonderful attention that she had gotten there and the ingenious things that they had designed for her to do. And music especially was a very important part of her life. There was music there. Her husband went there and played the banjo with other musicians. And it was just an absolutely marvelous program. And I would hate to see anything happen to that. I just don't know of anywhere else in Salem you could have that kind of an experience. And another thing I love about the place, it's already been mentioned, are the service dogs that are usually there on Thursday. I come out of my Tai Chi class. I lost my dog about 1.5 years ago, and I need that canine therapy, and I usually just dart out of there because I'm hungry after my Tai Chi class. But I don't. I stop and I play with the dogs for maybe 10 or 15 minutes, and that just makes me feel wonderful too. So it is just a very invigorating place and a very soothing place, and I urge you all to do everything in your power to preserve it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we would have Paul McCabe.
Hello. My name is Paul McCabe. I live in the Highland neighborhood on Maple Street. Okay, I'm here on my own and in support of the Center 50. I'm a retired school teacher who taught for 24 years in the inner city of Los Angeles. Because of the cost of living in LA, I came to Salem to retire and bought a home in the Highland neighborhood. It was a neighborhood in transition, and I received a discount for buying property in the inner city of Los Angeles. Since I taught in Watts, that was a little surprising that you have an inner city. What I found on Maple is a little different than what I found on Watts. I set about restoring the 1924 cottage that had been damaged by a fire. My first encounter with the Center 50 Plus was with a wood shop, where I went to reface the doors and drawers in the kitchen cabinets to match the cottage style of the house. I had some skill sets, but not the tools or workspace that would allow me to complete the project, and was the first of several projects necessary to restore the home. Next to the wood shop is a respite room, a daycare center for adults to give respite to family caregivers, a place where loved ones can be safely put so that the family can get relief from the challenges of caring for a loved one with dementia. I became a volunteer in the room, and because of that experience, I became a caregiver going into the homes to help families with loved ones with dementia. There's a shortage of men caregivers, and so it was something that I could do. Eventually, my wife was diagnosed with dementia. I enrolled her in Silver Sneakers exercise program and the chair yoga at 7 or 50 plus to help her with the physical symptoms of her illness. As her dementia progressed, I placed her in the respite room 2 days a week to give me a respite from the challenges of being her primary caregiver. The Alzheimer's Association has an office in the center, and there's a support group for families struggling with dementia, or with caregiving for members with dementia. Instead, I chose to join the writers group because I'm a teacher of the inner city of Los Angeles. I had a number of stories I wanted to tell. Sharing these stories with the group and listening to them has given me a much-needed break every Wednesday afternoon. As dementia progresses, caregiving becomes a 24/7 challenge that requires respite. The respite I received from the writers group has made it possible to keep my spirits up and my emotional health intact. The loving embrace of the group is quite literally my lifeline. Center 50 Plus works. It provides a wide range of services to the retired community of Salem. There's a lapidary shop for jewelry making, wood carving classes, music lessons, exercise classes, and a gym, just to name the few. Not the least, the center is home for Meals on Wheels kitchen that serves the community and provides us hot lunches for the site, on site for those who are not homebound.
Sir,
Center 50 Plus.
thank you for your testimony.
One more paragraph?
We're at 3 minutes.
Okay.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Next, we would have Karen Bollinger.
I come bearing props. We had this at Center 50 Plus recently, and we ask our patrons to write testimonies and put them inside that box. And we had hundreds of testimonies, and I'm going to read a snippet of a couple. If you're here representing Center 50 Plus or in support of Center 50 Plus, would you please stand? That's all you have to do, just stand. No public speaking. All right, thank you very much. Thank you. I would be remiss if I didn't say also how many of the testimonials mentioned our director, Marilyn Daly. This is a lovely one. Please do not close Center 50 Plus. This place means so much to the community of all ages. I've been taking ukulele classes for 8 years, also exercise classes. It always feels like home. Center 50 Plus is an affordable place for fixed income seniors where they can go to work out. It's also an opportunity to meet new friends and eat an affordable lunch. There are many opportunities for seniors to get involved in a variety of activities. Center 50 Plus is well used with many people attending. In fact, some parts of the day it is difficult to find parking. Salem City Council. Oh, and I'm sorry, Karen Bolliger, Center 50 Plus, Ward 5. Salem City Council. When planning next year's city budget, please save Center 50 Plus. I'm there 3 days a week for my physical therapy classes. I take classes such as safe driving for seniors, health classes, computer assistance, etc. I live alone and go to Center 50 Plus for social time with other old guys. No other city program service means so much to me. And the last one. When I first started coming to Center 50 Plus, it was shortly after the COVID pandemic. I began by volunteering in the respite program and helping out with receptionist duties. 3 years later, I'm proud to still be a volunteer in the respite program. In addition to volunteering, I actively participate in various activities and am excited to soon teach my first class on growing your own food. It didn't take long for me to realize that I had become part of a truly exceptional organization. I understand that your job involves making tough decisions, especially when it comes to budget constraints. However, Center 50 Plus has been built through years of dedication and effort, and it continues to make a profound difference by reaching out to older generations and engaging them in meaningful activities. Please consider the impact of your choices and ensure this invaluable resource remains a cornerstone of our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we would have Heidi Miller. Is there a Heidi Miller in the house?
Nancy. There was a misunderstanding. Nancy Hawkins is going to be speaking.
Okay, come on up, Miss Nancy. And just please state your name and your neighborhood award.
Okay, I am Nancy Hawkinson, and I live in West Salem.
Thank you.
Okay, hello. I would like to tell you my story concerning 50 Plus. After retiring from a very fulfilling career of 30 plus years, I developed a health condition that forced me to quit driving. As a result, my world became very small. Being an outgoing person who enjoys being socially busy, being shut in was a very difficult and stressful time for me. One day a friend had me join her at the 50 Plus for bingo. I was so impressed with all their activities at the center that I stopped by for a program guide. That is where I met Heidi Miller. She runs the outreach. She's the outreach coordinator and the person that was in charge in the driving program. She told me about the new pilot program and showed me how to become a rider. After visiting with Heidi Miller, and my world opened up again. First, she matched me with a driver that helped me get to an important medical appointment. Then another driver that got me to bingo on my own. And then Heidi asked me to be a volunteer for her outreach program. Within a matter of weeks, I went from being shut in for only getting out a couple of times a week to going to the center 2 to 3 times a week. As a result of the driver program, I was also encouraged to join the chariot lift program, which allowed me to get out even more. I also signed up to eat in the dining room, and that is where I met groups of people and were able to befriend more people. I also discovered a yarn class and more activities that I picked up. And that's where I also met more people to socialize with there. I attended a volunteer fair, and that is where I discovered, because of my new mobility, I could fulfill a dream I had had for some time, becoming a volunteer to help kids learn how to read. I now volunteer for the SMART program and volunteering for McKinley School. I have loved helping people, developing new friendships, new relationships, and picking up new hobbies. I even just started the gym class that the staff there help assisting people with all types of mobility issues like myself. During the holiday, I attended several activities there and on the big tour bus where we caroled and delivered presents to residents in care facilities. My weeks are now very fulfilling and busy. I have made a lot of friends and enjoyed many activities. What I want you to know is that 50 Plus is a very special place and needs to be saved. Some of the people there, that is their only social outlet and to feel a purpose. I cannot say enough about the 50 Plus community and how it helps our community.
Ma'am,
Sorry.
thank you for your testimony. Next, we would have Julie Roberg. You're not? Okay. Thank you. Julia Battle.
My name is Julia Battle. I'm in the Fayrite neighborhood. I'm chairman of the Mission Street Park Conservancy Board, and we are a volunteer group that partners with the city's Parks and Recreation Department to maintain, beautify, and do programs at Bush Pasture Park. So we work there a lot, do a lot at the Bush Park, and love it. And it's all volunteer. I'm a strong proponent of the parks and their importance in our lives. But tonight I'm here as a member of a group coalition with the parks and Center 50 Plus in the library, because I think all of these are important and I think we need to work together. So we asked the council to please consider proposing a livability levy that would fund these three groups. And we are united. The groups are to our commitment to support the livability levy in any way we can to help the citizens understand how important this is, and as you can see, how important these three groups are to the whole community. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we would have Michael Weber.
Good evening. My name is Michael Weber. I live out by Minto Brown Park. I don't know what ward I'm in, but I believe. Thank you, Councilor Nordyke. Yes. I am speaking for myself as a member of several groups. I am a user of the libraries, and I was looking at a book I got in the library this week. And it's a brand new book by the woman who wrote Braiding Sweetgrass. Many of us who are older know that book and how to live with nature. I'm going to read very little of it, but I think it's important to all of us. Libraries are models of gift economies, providing free access not only to books, but also music, tools, seeds, and more. We don't each have to own everything. The books at the library belong to everyone, serving the public with free books and a wider selection than the stores. Take the books, enjoy them, bring them back so someone else can enjoy them. All you need is a library card. And the second reason I'm here is because I also work with Julia. I am a member of Mission Street's Parks Conservancy. I am a volunteer in the park multiple times a week. I am a volunteer at Minto Brown, where I am a foe of blackberries and Scotch broom. The second thing that Dr. Kimmerer mentioned, libraries, parks, trails, and cultural landscapes we regard as public goods. They are what we call common resources. I'm here to advocate for the common resources and the common good of all of us. Madam Mayor, council members, I don't know why in God's name you would want your jobs. You have decisions to make that are incredibly difficult, and city council and staff, you make decisions that make you unpopular. But I thank you for doing what you do, and I ask that you support the livability levy for the common good, and that you support these things, such as Center 50, which brings so many people out and gives them a reason to do well and be involved in the community, and the parks, because I see the kids playing in the parks, and I see the seniors walking, and I see the community developing. And I go to Minto Brown and I watch the hundreds of people getting their exercise and playing with their dogs and being outdoors. We need livability, and I ask you to support the livability levy. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Ryan Erickson Kulas.
Ryan Erickson Kulas, Ward 1. I'm here to speak today on behalf of the Highland Neighborhood Association, where I serve as secretary, to urge you to prioritize continued funding for Center 50 Plus and the Salem Public Library. These invaluable resources are cornerstones of our community, providing essential services that improve lives, foster equity, and strengthen the fabric of our city. First, let's discuss the Salem Public Library. Despite operating with the lowest per capita funding rates in Oregon, ranking 112th out of 136 libraries statewide, the demand for library services in Salem remains robust. Libraries are not just about books. They are vital hubs for education, economic opportunity, and community connection. Public libraries are critical access points for job seekers, offering resume workshops, internet access, and job application assistance, resources that are indispensable in an increasingly digital society. Additionally, libraries help bridge the digital divide for the 8% of Oregon households without broadband, a disparity that is likely to worsen with the end of the federal funding for the Affordable Connectivity Program. Cuts to library funding would disproportionately impact our most vulnerable populations, including the 25% of Salem residents who are Spanish speakers. Eliminating bilingual staff and reducing service hours undermines racial equity and educational access in a city where Hispanic and Latino households already face significant economic and educational disparities. In 2021, the Oregon Office of Economic Analysis found that that Latino households made over 10% less income than their white counterparts. Additionally, in 2023, the state's Higher Education Coordinating Commission found that educational attainment of Oregon adults varies widely by race and ethnicity, with 57% of white adults having a credential of some sort compared to 35% for Latinos. This gap highlights the critical need for equitable access to library resources, with studies showing significant boost in academic performance and lifelong opportunities, making library funding not just an educational priority, but a moral imperative. Turning to Center 50 Plus, its impact extends far beyond its walls, making it an essential part of our city's support system for older adults. Research from the National Council on Aging shows that older adults who participate in senior center programs experience measurable improvements in their physical, social, emotional, and economic well-being, which we've heard tonight, and can delay the onset of chronic diseases. This is not just a benefit for seniors, it's a cost-saving measure for the city by reducing demand on expensive emergency services and long-term care facilities. Our city is aging. According to the city's 2018 age-friendly assessment, by 2030, 23% of our population will be over the age of 60, a 33% increase within a decade. At the same time, social isolation and loneliness are becoming a significant public health concern. An American Heart Association study found that socially isolated adults are at a 29% higher risk for heart attack or death and 32% higher risk for stroke. Nearly 1/4 of U.S. adults aged 65 or older are socially isolated, with up to 47% reported feelings of loneliness. Center 50 Plus is an active participant in combating these challenges by fostering social connections and providing health and wellness programs that help seniors age vibrantly. Through my work with the Highland Neighborhood Association, I've seen firsthand the positive impacts of Center 50 Plus programs. From partnering with us to host a kids' clothing swap that served dozens of families, to co-organizing annual gift drives for homebound seniors with our neighborhood association, Center 50 Plus exemplifies creative and effective community engagement. These efforts bring neighbors together, support vulnerable populations, and foster a sense of connection that strengthens our entire city. Failing to adequately fund these institutions would send a troubling message about Salem's priorities. It would suggest that the city does not value the contributions, dignity, and well-being of its seniors, or recognize the critical role of libraries in fostering education and equity. At a time when we should be investing in the shared resources that uplift our community, cuts to Center 50 Plus and the library would erode trust, widen social inequities, and diminish the quality of life for all Salem residents. I urge the Budget Committee to recognize these vital institutions for what they are: investments in our community's future. Sustaining funding for solutions can provide the stability needed to ensure these resources thrive for generations to come. Let's commit to building a vibrant, inclusive, and compassionate Salem by supporting Center 50 Plus and the public library. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we would have Gina Callis.
Hi, my name is Gina Callis. I own a home on 21st Street. I don't envy you. You have a Sophie's Choice situation here where it looks like something's going to be cut, something's going to be taken. But I can't speak strongly enough about how foolish it would be to allow that to include the library. The library is one of the single most important things that our society has created. It's an opportunity to be a great equalizer so that anybody can have access to knowledge. In this community, everyone uses it. Homeless people are dependent on it to keep out of the cold, to have access to a bathroom and services, to be able to use a computer so they could get a job. Moms, children use it so that they can have fellowship and community with other children. There's rooms that you can access to study. The resources are endless. And you yourselves know this. Why? Because in the coming future, you're not going to be able to hold your meetings here. Why? Because you guys are going to refurbish it for earthquakes. Well, where are you going to hold those meetings? At the library. It's an essential service. Taxpayers don't like paying tax. Nobody likes paying taxes. But I love the services that those provide. I like my roads. I like my firefighters. I love my library. But you know what really makes taxpayers mad? Knowing that we approved millions of dollars to be spent refurbishing that library, only to hear that, oh, well, maybe you won't, keep it open anymore. That would really infuriate me. The idea that I spent tax dollars to refurbish a building that will be locked. You can't do it. It needs to happen. I don't know how you're going to make that happen, but it needs to happen. Now, like I said, nobody likes paying taxes, but I personally would agree to spending more money if I knew that it was going to keep my library open, if I knew that my parks I'd still have access to my parks. What I don't appreciate is foolish choices. Think about what happens if you close the parks. Well, then what? Nobody's going to go in there? Of course people will go in there, and then they get hurt. And then what happens? You guys get sued. And then we spend millions paying that off. I mean, it's just, you got to think logically. We need to find another way. Maybe we could do a sin tax. Maybe we could, charge a fee to buy marijuana in the town. Or maybe we could charge for membership to the library to get a $10 library card so that you can access this. I don't know. But we do need to find a solution because the idea of doing nothing is ridiculous. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we would have, and please forgive me, I cannot make out your last name, but your first name is David, I believe. From Ward 2.
Okay, that's okay. My wife can't read my handwriting either. So.
Okay. well, I'm in good company then. Thank you.
Dr. Brown, Mayor Hoy, members of City Council, members of the Budget Committee. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is David Levy, and I'm the chair of the Salem Library Public Advisory Board, but I'm not here in that capacity tonight. I'm here as a citizen and resident and a citizen of South Salem. You've heard a lot of compelling testimony this evening from park advocates, from library advocates, and for advocates for Center 50. I'm here to talk to you a little bit about a coalition that we've put together that recognizes the challenges that the city's facing in terms of budget deficits and what we can do to help advocate and promote the idea of a livability levy. So we've brought together diverse groups from the library community and Parks and Rec and Center 50. We have all our different constituencies. We have all our different priorities, but we're committed to making this work, and we're committing to making Salem a livable community. Therefore, we're strongly encouraging the city to consider putting forth a livability levy, and we will do whatever we can to help to promote that and advocate for that. So we know that you've got a yeoman's task ahead of you in terms of making decisions, but just to let you know that there's a lot of people behind you to support you and to support getting this on the ballot and educating the public on why these things are of value. So thank you very much for your time, and I'd be happy to answer any questions, but thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next, we would have Larry Ramsey.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the City Council. My name is Larry Ramsey. I live on Southeast 16th Street, 97301. I'm here representing a few groups, actually. I'm here to represent the library. I'm here as a volunteer at Marion County Democrats, and I'm here as a longtime, since 2018, member of Center 50 Plus. I joined Center 50 Plus, and I started in the writers group. Since that time, I published a book in 2020. Came out in February, so you know how that goes. Everybody was telling us we needed ivermectin instead of vaccines. So I didn't get to promote my book, but, and you know, so therefore, Marjorie Taylor Greene has more sales than I do. But I tell better stories. These gray hairs give all of us here a chance to do something for the community. We volunteer. We hold things together, and it doesn't cost the city a thing. But we'd like to have a few amenities. The library, which you can get a book and read it for free. The Center 50 Plus and other seniors organizations where you can go to find something to fulfill your life. And the other thing is that we, because of these gray hairs, we know the stories. We can take you back to Mark Hatfield as governor of Oregon. We know the small stories and the big stories. And these aren't in books. These are here. So please, fund us adequately. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we would have Amber Wright.
Hi, good evening. It's an honor to be here. Thank you. I only recently found out that this was happening tonight. I'm new to Salem. My name is Amber Wright. I live in Ward 3. I've been here a year and a half and trying to get a sense of the Salem community, and I've always lived in large cities and a handful of states. And I have worked as a social worker and a registered nurse in home health settings for most of my career. And I just found it to be important tonight to come here. I'm also a participant in Center 50 Plus. I've been meeting amazing people, both the people who are volunteering and the people who are participating. I'm in the line dance class, and that includes all sorts of people of all sorts of abilities with lots of love. And I've been so impressed. I've been in communities where there's nothing like this. This is a gem. And if you haven't been there, I would really encourage you to go. Go in the middle of the day, any day, and it is full and lively and so much love around, and I'm finding it beneficial. I'm meeting people in this community and learning about the community itself by attending, and I hope to volunteer once I see where I can apply myself here, and I would just hate to see it go away. It is truly a gem and something to be proud of. And I have seen personally in people's homes, people who are isolated and no longer have family members or even friends, and the recidivism of, repeatedly being hospitalized because they just simply don't have connections out in the world. So I know it means a lot, and it truly is a gem. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we would have, I believe it's Pam Kovac. Maybe I'm not saying it correct. Is it Pam Novak? I would say.
But I would, maybe I better talk.
Are you Miss Pam?
Yes.
Oh, please, come on.
I never signed up to talk.
Oh, well, somebody put your, oh, you know what? No, I apologize. You actually have no written down, so it's on me. I didn't see that you wrote no.
That's okay. All right. So you don't want me to.
Yeah, you don't have to. You're good. You're good. Thank you, though. It's on me. It's on me. Next, we would have, is it Mr. Rick Gupo? Gapo? Come on down.
Give me out, Rick. Rick Gapo, Ward 1, with Marion Polk Food Share and Meals on Wheels in support of Center 50 Plus. Marion Polk Food Share is in the process of trying to build a new building. And our architect, before he asked us about square footage or rack size or freezers, he said, what do you want the feel to be? Name some places that got the feel right. And we said Center 50 Plus. It's warm and inviting. It's a place for the community. It's a place the community belongs. I want to make sure you know of one thing that happened. I want to make sure you know of something that happens in one part of Center 50 Plus, Meals on Wheels. Every day, this amazing and brilliant act of love occurs. It's like a well-choreographed dance that starts at 5:30 a.m. Marion Polk Food Share Meals on Wheels staff comes and they start making the meals for that day. Around 10 a.m., a host of volunteers come to organize those meals, to gather them and to serve them and to bring them out into the community. Around 11:30 a.m., there's a knock on people's doors saying, here's your meal today. And during that time, while the drivers are out driving the meals to the seniors, that Center 50 Plus is turning the dining room, which now was a delivery stage, to a community meal site. Every day that happens. Every day in Center 50 Plus, 1,000 meals are made. 1,000 seniors are served. That's not an exaggeration. It's about 1,000 every day. Healthy meals are hand-delivered. About 350 volunteers make this program work. About 60 drivers come every day to deliver those meals, and another 15 to work in the kitchen and the dining room. Drivers who go out to the meals have this this feeling. They know that they're meal providers, they're friends. They are checking on wellness. It is not unusual for a driver to call our office and to say, hey, I was knocking on their door and they didn't answer today. Can we find out what's going on? And then we call and we make sure what's happening. And seniors every day have this feeling of overwhelming gratitude. Senior hunger is a real issue. It is going to get worse. Center 50 Plus is a huge addition, a huge assistance to addressing senior hunger and senior homelessness. So every day at Center 50 Plus, it is warm and inviting. It is infused with kindness. It is extending love to the community. It is magical. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we would have, I believe it's Scott Straight or Strite. No either? It's on me again. Thank you. And next, we would have Theodore Corsini Greenbaum.
Hi, my name is Ted. I live at the intersection of Highland neighborhood and Ward 5. It's a little strip there. I'll try and make this brief. You've all heard quite a bit. I turned 50 the first day of 2020, and practiced 3 weeks of yoga before the COVID shutdown. Let's say there was a 2-year hiatus before I could restart my practice. In the last 2 years, I managed what doctors couldn't and have healed a bulging disc, lordosis, and strengthened my knee, compensating for soft tissue damage, thanks to the yoga teachers and Center 50 Plus. I heard last week on KMUZ that 50 Plus is in the top 10 of senior centers and nationally, coming in at number 7. I recognize so many faces here and feel connected to my community because of Salem Center 50 Plus. And I'd love to see a livability levy on my next ballot. Thank you.
Thank you. We're now going to shift to our virtual signups, and we have online, I believe it's Kathy Mintram and Bayard Mintram.
Hello.
Yes, please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Kate Mentrum, Northgate Neighborhood Association, and Ward 5. I'm going to read this out so I don't have to waste too much time. We'd like to preserve the services of the police, including codes and compliance, fire department, EMT, and bring back the mental crisis units or MCUs. There are all fundamental services we believe Salem should have. It seems Kaiser has hardly any issues with the homeless crisis compared to Salem's because their police staffing is all intact. They have enough police power to overcome issues in comparison to Salem, the capital of Oregon, may I dare say. Gang activities are on the increase, with more crime like murder, more graffiti. I can attest that because Northgate Park's art mural recently got tagged in 4 long panels, and a few of us had to go and fix it. It took almost 4 hours with 4 people working on covering the graffiti. Drivers out there carelessly breaking traffic rules because they know no police patrols are around like they used to. There are more thieves because not enough police to do more. When the cats are away, the mice will play. Fire department is essential. Look what's happening in LA. Not enough firefighters, so they are sending them from all over the states, and I read even more firefighters are coming in from different countries. Should any of you, us, have a heart attack, and this could happen at any age to anyone, the emergency team should not be stretched out for obvious reasons. Their importance cannot be compared. The mental crisis unit should never have been taken away. We heard they did a great job in calming those who were having a mental crisis. All of the above means they can be saving lives. Needless to say, lives of Salemites are just as important as those in Kaiser as a comparison. I think you understand the gist of what I'm trying to say. Thank you very much for letting me speak.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bayard?
Hi. My name is Bayard Mentrum, and I'm chairman of Northgate Neighborhood Association, Ward 5. Thanks for letting me speak. Quickly, as we see an example in California, when you cut essential services like fire, police, water, storage, it is a disaster, and California was spending money on things that weren't essential. So in Salem, most people believe that public safety is the top priority, and that includes fire, police, EMT, neighborhood watch, and involvement, and the education, safety of the public, which includes Center Plus for the seniors and the library for everybody. I would like to receive a report from the city of what other things can be cut in order to avoid a painful, costly levy. the city seems to have been focused on the library, Center Plus, parks, painful issues to cut. And hopefully they can find other things. For instance, I keep hearing about the thousands of dollars the city has been spending on studies. For instance, they spend a lot of money hiring outside consultants that tell us we have crime in the city, and then, tell us about what we really want. Just ask the people in the public, ask the city staff, ask the public. It's free. You're doing that now, but you hired consultants. That's a lot of money wasted that could have been spent on something more important. So that's my talk for now. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. That concludes all the testimonies here. So I do want to say thank you for those online that shared, and of course here with us in the chamber and those that are watching. And I feel comfortable in saying this on behalf of Madam Mayor and our the committee, is that the decisions that are before this group, we recognize that none of them are going to be easy. None of them are easy, and none of them will be comfortable. The moral of this will be finding a way that where there will be some type of compromise. And so I'm confident that this group here, and of course our staff and Madam Mayor's leadership, I'm confident that we will do the best that we can. So thank you for the opportunity to share with us. Next will be the approval of the November the 13th, 2024 Budget Committee meeting minutes. And may I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I move approval of the minutes from the November 13th, 2024 meeting.
I have a motion by Member Varney, and a second from?
I'll second it.
Second from Vice Chair Nishioka. Is there any discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, please signify by saying nay. Seeing none, the motion passes. Moving on to our first action items for tonight, that will be the election of officers. We'll start with the chairperson. Nominations are now open for the office of the chair. Are there any nominations? I'm sorry, Member Gwen.
I would like to nominate Member Cohen.
Member Cohen.
I'll second that.
Second by Vice Chair Nishioka. Are there any other additional nominations for chair? Yes, Member Evan.
I would like to nominate Chair Brown.
Member Brown's been nominated. Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Second by Vice Chair. Are there any other nominations for chair? Okay, so seeing that there are two nominations for chair, typically what happens in this is that now we have to go to a slate. But rather than the slate, I am going to make a decision. Everybody's waiting on pins and needles, I can just tell. Vice Chair, yes.
Thank you. We're trying to look at how the system works with resident member, council member. It kind of goes back and forth. With the two names selected, I may throw out another name, and I'm going to nominate Russ Allen for chair.
So we have another nomination on the floor. That would be Member Allen for chair. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Member Vieira-Brandl has been second. So now there are three individuals that have been nominated for chair. Are there any more on the floor? So now that there are 3, it still doesn't change what I was going to say. So that will remain as is. I do want to say that it is a privilege to be in this position to chair and to listen. And I think that the majority of us have watched me serve in this capacity. And I am a firm believer that it is not an easy place to live in tension because you have to be able to hold multiple opinions at the same time while you refrain from your own. And that's not easy. And so one of the things that we would like to do in this group is we really want to work hard to regain the trust of our community. And the last thing that I believe that people would like to see would be just people, going against one another in regards to who gets this vote, who gets that vote. So rather than there being 3 individuals that have been nominated for chair, you would have the luxury of voting for 2. I will respectfully decline the nomination for myself. So I do want to thank you for the opportunity to serve and also for being nominated. So thank you, but I respectfully decline. And now I'll return this over to CFO because we will move to having a slate where those individuals will be voted upon by you as a committee.
Thank you. Josh Eggleston, Chief Financial Officer. We'll be handing out little pieces of paper, very formal ballots for you. So whichever nomination you'd like to, you can write on the ballot. Then we'll collect them, count them, and produce the result. So we'll pass those out now.
Question on the floor?
We have the same question.
Member
This is
Curtis?
just for chair. It's not chair and vice chair.
Correct. This is just for chair.
Okay. Thank you.
And I do want to say that it is a tradition, and I think Vice Chair Nishikov's, she alluded to this. There is a tradition where there is a rotation. And for those of us that are sitting here or watching us online, if you're thinking like, well, what's going on? Can someone explain to me how this process works? So that tradition is that we would have someone from the community that would be a citizen that would represent as chair for 1 year. And then the next year, it would be a counselor. It would go back and forth year on, year off. And last year, yours truly, I was a citizen in the community. And up until, Monday night at 6:17, I switched roles, still a citizen, but now I am elected as a counselor. And so by default, this particular year would fall to someone that would be a counselor. But rather than me being in that position, I have decided to withdraw my name. Question on the floor, Member Belichick.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Brown. Do we get to hear anything from the nominees? Do they have a chance to speak? Do they have a chance to withdraw their nomination as you were, allowed yourself to do?
Yes, the moment Mr. CFO is done passing those out, I will go back to the mic and I will go back to those that have been nominated. Are you good, Mr. CFO?
Well, there's quite a few ballots already being cast.
So for those 2 that have been nominated, typically in this process, the person who nominated them, you would have the opportunity to speak to your motion. And then, of course, that individual that was nominated, you'd have the opportunity to talk also. So the first one was a motion that was for Member Cohen. Nomination? Yes. Member Cohen.
So actually, Member Cohen and Member Allen, I think, are the 2 Budget Committee members who have been on this committee the longest. And honestly, I think both of them would do a great job. Andrew, I've met with and know him better. I think he asks really good questions, but Russ asks really good questions too. So I still stand behind my nomination of Andrew, but we can't go wrong with either of these gentlemen. So.
Yes, Member Nordyke.
Thank you. I first want to recognize you, Chair Brown, for your leadership. We haven't had a chance to thank you yet publicly, and I hope we will. But thank you for your leadership in handling one of the most difficult budgetary years that I've seen since serving on the Budget Committee in 2017. So thank you. Secondly, I believe in terms of nominations, I agree that with Councillor Gwynn, or member Gwen tonight that both gentlemen will do fine. And I think whoever is not made chair should be our vice chair. So that would be my position. So I hope whoever doesn't prevail for chair, that name will be put forward for vice chair, because yes, both are excellent candidates. And I think also that this is a year where we should have a public member leading this group and vice chairing this group. Counselors have plenty to say and plenty of opportunity to say it. But this is a year where public comment and public participation is of the utmost importance. So I'm so glad to see that our nominations tonight are both public members of this esteemed committee. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, Member Nordyke. Thank you very much. Member Coyne, yes, Vice Chair.
Are we still talking about the nominations?
Yes,
and
ma'am, we are.
Why we did it? So I agree with both of the members' comments that I think these two gentlemen are well suited for the position, would serve it well. I felt compelled to go ahead and bring forward Russ's name, partly so that we had what I thought was going to be a three ballot, potential ballot. And I think he might have been a little surprised. But again, I feel that Member Nordyke's comment about a chair and vice chair would be also an excellent way to do that, unless we go through the motions to go ahead and have a vice chair. And I just want to also say I am very proud that I served as vice chair for the very short time. It's not a lot, but I did get to sit in the chair for one meeting, and so I thank all of you for putting up with me. And I also feel that a resident or a resident member and potentially resident vice chair should serve these positions in this tough time. I think that would be a smart way to do it. So thank you both for looking like you might be willing.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Are there any more comments before we collect the slates? Seeing none. CFO?
Chair Brown?
Yes, ma'am.
Might we have a 5-minute break while you collect and do that so that...
I really just want to look really closely and don't go to recess.
Yeah, like watch
No,
them?
I'm joking. Yes. Yeah. Yes, let's recess for 5 minutes. Committee, are you okay with that? 5 minutes it is.
right? That was 5 minutes.
It was. Committee members? We are ready to move forward. I do want to say that thank you for taking the time to come back. Nope, they're going to listen. I did it once, I'm not going to do it again. So members, thank you for taking the time. We are back in session. Thank you. Thank you for taking time to do your voting. Thank you, Mr. CFO. And now I'm going to turn to Madam Recorder for the results.
Thank you. So our new Budget Committee Chair is Member Allen.
Congratulations, Member Allen. And so, Member Allen, now officially as Chair Allen, the process is this. I'm about to get out of this chair in 20 seconds, and you're going to make your way around here, and then you will assume you'll have your outline here. And please rest assured that Madam Recorder, she's going to walk you through if you have any questions, and you got some experts to the left and to the right of me. And we in the audience, we're going to be cheering you forward. So please, Chair Allen, you're welcome to take your seat.
Please also take your name tags.
Your name tag.
Thank you.
This is not how we expected the evening to go out.
You look good.
Gee, thanks. I would say thank you, but I'm not sure that's in order. But we will move down the agenda. There were comments previously with regards to vice chair, but I suspect that a motion still needs to be made relative to vice chair. The floor is open for motions.
I'll make a motion to nominate member Andrew Cohen as our vice chair.
Which second? Okay. All right. The motion there's been a motion and it has been seconded. Are there any other nominations? Hearing none, we will go ahead and take a vote on that motion. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any not in favor say nay. Unanimous. Vice Chair Cohen.
All right.
Remember that your compensation is half mine.
It's whatever I left you.
Thank you. So we will continue with the agenda. We are on information items. I would like to ask Chief Financial Officer Eggleston to review the information items under agenda items 4A to 4F. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have several agenda items that came to you originally when we sent out the packet on Friday, and a few additions. The first four are final financial reports for the City of Salem and the Salem Urban Renewal Area. These reports were provided to you previously in a preliminary mode, just because we weren't finished with the 2024 audit and report. Those have been finished. These are the final reports. There were some changes, some minor changes for those reports, but they're there for your information. Item 5E, I'm pleased to report that the city applied for and received the GFOA, Government Finance Officers Association Distinguished Budget Presentation Award. This is the first time in several decades we've applied for the award, and we did receive it. So I'm pleased to report that. A big thank you to Callie Leinenbach and James Wharton Hess for getting those materials together. You might not have noticed, but for the 2025 budget, there were several particular additions in order to meet that criteria. So I'm pleased to report that we did receive that award. Thank you. 5F, we have a staff report answering committee questions, both from your November meeting and in between now and then, even some questions posed yesterday. The 5-year forecast document is 5G. We'll be going over that later this evening. 5H, again, additional answers to committee questions. 5I, Budget Committee procedures. And then 5J, the forecast review team summary and recommendations. There was a summary of their recommendations in the forecast document, but we wanted to provide a fuller picture of what that process looked like. So 5J does that. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have on those documents.
Are there any questions for the CFO?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Allen. So my general understanding of the forecast committee's results are that we're willing to make slightly more optimistic assumptions. It doesn't, the actual amount of money we have or are expected to spend hasn't changed necessarily, but we're just making slightly different assumptions. Is that correct?
That is accurate. We adjusted some assumptions, and we actually go over those in detail in the presentation. But yeah, that is correct.
Are there any other questions at this time? Yes, Member Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did wonder if there is a better way to distribute the additions agenda than doing it 3 hours before the meeting starts. That was a very limited amount of time to study a large amount of information. And I'm retired, so, you know, I wasn't sitting in an office when that popped into my email, and I can't imagine how anyone who is working could also absorb that information. And I'm just putting it out there as a question. I think as a, not just a convenience to the committee, but also as a better way for us to process the information before the meeting, I'd like for there to be a different way. And I have no idea what it might be.
If I may, Mr. Chair. So one reason for the 3 o'clock cutoff is because testimony, that's when testimony is cut off. So we include that in the additions agenda. So the items for the additions agenda, we could have provided perhaps 5I and J earlier, but the other items just simply weren't completed before 3 o'clock. So they really were down to 3 p.m. So if you don't have a chance to review, there's no expectation that you've had a chance to review them. We're happy to address them at your next meeting. But I do apologize. That 3 o'clock cutoff is for testimony, and we did receive quite a bit this year, or this meeting. Thank you.
Yes, Member Bailey-Chucks.
Thank you, Chair Allen. Yeah, Josh, you sort of mentioned how some of these could have been provided earlier, and I'm looking at the forecast review team document, which just came across at 3:30 p.m. today. To me, this looks like one of those items that could have been provided earlier because it's dated January 3rd, and this is the first that I'm hearing about this existence. Member Manville had a question about it already. I assume we're going to hear more about it, but since this adds context to everything you'll be presenting in the forecast, I think it's very important that we see this information as soon as possible, not at the last minute. There's nothing in the meeting minutes that we approved earlier from previous discussions about forecast review team being formed, no information provided. This is all brand new, and I do look forward to hearing more about it, but it speaks to the importance of Member Dixon's ask, and we asked all last year to get this material earlier, especially when it's dated January 3rd. I don't know why I'm not seeing this until 3:30 p.m. and I could have missed something, so please let me know if I did. Thank you.
If I may, Mr. Chair, I do apologize for that. So the recommendations and the summary are included in your forecast document that you received Friday. So it has a whole section about the forecast review team. I would, at your November 13th meeting, we talked about forecast validation. That's what this team is trying to fulfill. Originally, we were going to hire a third party. We did a bid, and the results came back very cost prohibitive. So we didn't spend $50,000 to $200,000 on that work. We instead formed this forecast review team as a much more economical approach. Again, I apologize, this document wasn't to you earlier. It was mentioned yesterday that we could include all of it because we were getting questions about it, so we included the full recommendation summary, but there is the recommendations and a description of what the forecast review team is in the forecast document.
I believe that the forecast review committee was formed by the city manager as an advisory committee, so I just want to know if the city manager wishes to address that now, or if you want to wait till your comments later.
I think we'll be able to address that in the presentation.
All right, thank you.
There you go. Thanks. One of the things that I like to do is read all the comments that come in from the citizens. And, you know, when you get there, I don't know how many there were today, but a lot. All I could do was skim them. So, I mean, can't we change that? What do I want to say? I mean, if they have till 3 p.m. of the day of our meeting, why can't that be 24 hours before? Or more time so that we can review these comments, because I think it's kind of unfair to the citizens that, you know, take time to write to us.
Staff have a comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think my only comment would be we get a lot of different people that want to testify. Some people want to testify in person. Some people decide to testify in writing. We want to make sure to have an opportunity up till the last minute to provide those. We could have perhaps an earlier deadline, but I see the city attorney might want to speak.
Now you're in trouble. Dan Atchison, City Attorney. So it's a public meeting, so people can submit written comments up until the end of the meeting, frankly. So we can't really prohibit them from prohibiting comments. What we do is limit the time frame which they submit them, and we can get them to you, which is the 3 p.m. cutoff. So that's what we do for that. But it's hard to tell folks, 24 hours in advance, you got to have your written comments in, because public meeting rules let people submit testimony.
Are there other questions for staff at this time? There'll be the formal presentation later, but with regards to the information items, are there any other questions at this time? I see none, so we will move on. There'll be plenty of opportunities for questions later. There are no public hearings this evening. Now that the CFO has done a brief overview of the first 6 informational items, I would like to turn it over to Mr. Staley for some initial comments prior to the forecast presentations.
Thank you, Chair Allen, and welcome to our Budget Committee. It's great to be together again. Looking forward to working with you and advancing a budget to City Council sometime in the near future. So to me, this feels a lot like we signed up for an ultra marathon, and it's time before the race. When the runners gather to hear from the race organizers and they explain what to expect. And the organizers usually tell you something about there's going to be wind and rocks and cold and floods and lightning and bears and mountain lions and insects and heat and rockfall and ice, and enjoy the race. We won't likely encounter any of those obstacles or hazards, but we will encounter complexity, hard decisions, and strong opinions. We'll survive that, and hopefully we'll enjoy the journey. I knew that there would be risks in putting out the preliminary financial forecast because I knew it would change. When you put numbers out in October and you come back in January and you continue to do the work and you continue to refine the numbers, things change. So I think we benefited from having that information out in the community and starting those conversations with our community. I know I benefited, and I think the Budget Committee ultimately will benefit as well. Our projected shortfall went from $17.69 to $13.8 million. $13.8 million is still a lot of money. Josh will provide a detailed explanation of that change, but $13.8 million is not a balanced budget. We have a long ways to go here. As I said, the ultramarathon has not even started yet. I'm still glad that we started our conversation in October. We have been able to engage a conversation with our community and council for the past 2.5 months about the reality of our budget situation, and those conversations have been helpful, and it feels like we're making progress in our communications. We have confidence that the budget gap is $13.8 million. It is not less than that. It is $13.8 million. It's real, it's large, and there is not room for adjustment, at least not downwards. We will either close that gap with additional revenues or with substantial cuts to services and programs, and we know now what our target is, $13.8 million. So let's go ahead and get started, and Josh will take it from here. So thank you.
Good evening. I'm Josh Eggleston, the Chief Financial Officer for the city. First, I would like to thank you all for being here tonight. I know you're all volunteers, and I appreciate your willingness to serve on the Budget Committee. Second, I want to thank departments for their assistance in developing each of the fund forecasts. Many of those are here this evening. It is an involved process with lots of conversation and lots of questions from the Budget Office. And finally, I want to thank the Budget Office. Callie, our budget manager, and her team do a great job managing and compiling the 5-year forecast document. Each of the 14 forecasts displayed in the document go through the same rigor with all the backup documentation and modeling. However, tonight, the presentation will highlight 3 of those funds: transportation services, utility, and general funds. As with any budgeting process, even in our personal lives, you add up all of your expenses and your income or revenue, and you forecast what next year, or in this case, the next 5 years, will look like. Forecasting is a financial best practice and serves as a tool for the city staff, city council, and the budget committee as we move into development of the next budget. The forecast does not predict the future, but it serves to display a likely outcome and can help identify and mitigate issues before they become critical. The Budget Office and city departments forecast using the latest information and assumptions. You heard Keith talk about the preliminary 5-year forecasts. There's always changes. If we present the same forecast in another month or in another 2 months, it would still change. We get different information. Salem is a full-service city, and that service is provided by people, employees. As the largest operating expense, we calculate personnel costs at the individual position level, with estimates for future merit increases, cost of living adjustments, PERS, or Public Employee Retirement System, and health benefits. Many of these costs are generally outside the city's direct control and are either mandated or negotiating, and these cost increases apply across all city funds. On the revenue side, we model revenues using historical trends and other known information. For example, our property tax estimates are calculated using a model that looks at individual properties in Salem and new properties that were added over the previous year. Because of fund designation, specific revenue sources, and restrictions on how those resources can be used, fiscal health varies by fund. An example of a restricted funding source is building permit revenues. State statutes and administrative rules dictate how funds derived from the issuing of building permits can be used. So we budget altogether. We talk about the large budget number, $700+ million. But it's broken down into these individual buckets with different restrictions on use. Kind of like 24 little tiny entities within the city of Salem. You may have seen this graphic before. It serves to demonstrate how the budget and the forecast fit into the larger annual cycle. The forecast part of the process is in the top left in the fall and winter. City Council policy agenda is developed and adopted in the winter. It helps to inform the fiscal year 2026 budget proposal. We then move into the budget committee process and budget adoption, and then the process starts all over again. In municipal finance, we have the pleasure of operating in multiple fiscal years. We just finalized the audit and financial report for fiscal year 2024 on December 31st. We are currently in and monitoring fiscal year 2025, and we're beginning development of the budget for fiscal year 2026. This slide depicts the stages that each fiscal year goes through before it is complete. In this case, we start planning for fiscal year 2025 in 2020, when that year first appeared in a 5-year forecast. It was then included an additional 4 forecast documents before it shifted to the budget. Unlike the forecast, the budget is what gives the city the legal authority to actually spend the dollars, while the forecast is trying to predict cash flow challenges. Finally, the year is completed with an in-depth third-party audit and annual comprehensive financial report. And I'll just pause there to see if there's any questions on forecasting generally before we go into the Transportation Services Fund.
Member Dixon?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Josh, I just had one question. Does the variability of the new forecast differ significantly from the variability of the forecast that you presented back in the fall? So you talk about forecast variability. I'm just wondering if there was any significant change.
Between the preliminary forecast on October 30th?
Yes.
There is some variability, and we'll walk through those differences specifically.
Other questions at this time? If not, continue, Mr. CFO.
The first fund for discussion this evening is the Transportation Services Fund, and we'll actually have a deep dive into the Transportation Services Fund after we go through the 3 funds. The Transportation Services Fund supports the operation and maintenance of cities' trees, traffic signals, and sidewalks. It provides the financial structure for the department to respond to City Council goals that address long-term support of community needs for safety, livability, environmental health, and economic development. An additional detail for this forecast can be found beginning on page 19 of the forecast document. On this slide, the tan bars represent revenues and the gray bars represent net expenditures. Net expenditures are the total expenditures less anticipated savings. So we'll touch on this a few other times, but the city budgets for full employment. So all positions were grounded in those costs for each and every position. And then depending on the fund, we anticipate savings from vacancies for those positions being vacant. So that's the difference between the total and net expenditures. The green line represents the fund balance. I don't think it's quite green. Maybe it is. The Transportation Services Fund is projected to continue a declining balance over the forecast period. You'll hear more about this after we go through these 3 forecasts. The State Highway Fund revenue, the primary revenue source of the fund, is anticipated to grow slightly each year, but fuel usage and vehicle choices impact the revenue in the fund. Assuming the modest revenue growth throughout the forecast period and with the use of fund balance, this fund will be able to sustain those services for a few years. However, action will be needed to correct the projected decline in fund balance. One recommendation from the 2018 Sustainable Services Revenue Task Force and a strategy included in the Climate Action Plan is a local gas tax that could bolster fund balance, increase in maintenance, and other projects. This display of potential variability, you'll see this 2 more times for each of the other funds. In the middle, in blue, you'll see the probable result. So that's the result contained in the forecast document. In green, it shows a 2% more positive result. So 2% additional revenue or 2% additional savings, so slightly more positive. You'll notice that even in the 5th year of the forecast, with the 2% more positive result, you still go negative in the fund balance. In red, it shows a 2% more negative result, so 2% less savings or 2% less revenue. And again, it does go negative, this time in the 4th year of the forecast. And I think, if I may, I'll just keep going. I think we'll save transportation questions for at the end of the larger transportation presentation, if I may. The utility fund supports the ongoing operation and maintenance of the utility, including treatment, storage, and delivery of drinking water to residents, businesses, and industries, collection, conveyance, and treatment of wastewater before it's returned to the Willamette River, and collection and conveyance of stormwater runoff from streets, buildings, and other hard surfaces throughout the system to reduce risk of flooding and protect the environment. In addition, the fund supports the payment of utility revenue bonds for system infrastructure improvements, as well as annual transfers to the Capital Improvements Fund for pay-as-you-go capital projects. Additional detail for this forecast can be found beginning on page 29 of the forecast document. The city's utility is largely financially stable, but the utility infrastructure requires consistent ongoing capital investment. The stable financial picture is largely due to consistent small rate increases and the measured, constant, and deliberate approach to operation, maintenance, and expansion of the utility systems. The forecast for the utility continues investment in capital infrastructure. Continued improvements must be made to the utility at a sustainable pace, balancing rate impacts with the rehabilitation, expansion, resiliency, and modernization needs of the systems. Almost every year, some form of emergency impacts revenue or expenditures, and maintaining proper reserve levels allows response without an urgent or unanticipated rate increase. In this forecast variability display, the 2% more positive result presents a more positive result, all above the fund balance policy there depicted in yellow, as well as the probable result maintains that fund balance level above the policy in red. The 2% less positive result or worse result does dip below that fund balance policy for years 4 and 5 of the forecast period. I'm happy to answer any questions about the utility fund or defer to others.
Josh, you keep saying 2% above or 2% below. The graph says 1%. Is there a math? Am I not getting my math right?
Yeah, so it's a little confusing. So the 1% positive result is depicting a 1% additional revenue and 1% additional savings. I apologize for that confusion. But I think we've had this in there for several years. It's the first time it's been called out. So I really appreciate that attention to detail. And the same for the negative 1%. It is a 2% variable result in the downward trend.
All right, are there other questions for the CFO at this time? Okay. Councilor Matthews?
What would necessarily contribute to either having a positive or a negative outcome here?
Really good question. So the utility operates a lot like a business. There's things that happen that are unexpected. We've heard about a few lately. And there's also things that come in better. So if usage increases for some reason, there's additional revenue that comes into the system. So it just depends on the year. If you'd like to hear more about it, I'm sure Public Works would be happy to address it.
All right, I think we're all on pins and needles for the general fund.
Aren't we all? The city's general fund supports operations in the areas of public safety, planning, code enforcement, public library, municipal court, parks and recreation, urban development, and support services that provide a citywide benefit. This chart displays the general fund supported departments and corresponding expenditure budget for year 1 or fiscal year 2026 of the 5-year forecast period. Additional detail for this forecast can be found beginning on page 8 of the forecast document. The current services forecast maintains the same staffing without any new programs being added. And we'll touch on this a little bit more. I get asked often if it's the same services. It's really not. It's the same staffing. So we maintain the full staffing that we currently have through the 5-year forecast period. But assuming additional population growth, the services actually do decline without adding positions to meet that population increase.
Member Gwynn?
Josh, I'm just curious, on this graph, our utility fee that goes directly into the general fund, which category in the graph would that be?
So on this slide for the revenues, it would be under fees for services, other fees, that 20.05 million there on the left. It's the majority of that number. Yeah, I think 14 or 15 million.
I think I'd like to see that, just me personally, I'd like to see that broken out and shown separately, especially if it's such a large chunk.
Yeah, absolutely. So these are account categories. We're happy to break them down further. That's not a problem.
Okay, thank you.
In the general fund, the estimated 2026 revenue budget totals $179.6 million compared to the total forecast expenditures of $193.5 million. As you can see, property taxes make up over half of the general fund revenues at $91.88 million forecasted for fiscal year 2026. For comparison, in the same year, the combined forecasted police and fire budget equals $124.9 million, 33 more million than the property tax revenues. As promised, we're going to talk about the forecast review team. After the preliminary general fund forecast was prepared in October, resulted in a $17.7 million deficit, the city manager convened a group called the forecast review team. The goal for this team of budget committee members and community members was to review the reasonability and reliability of the forecast. They met 5 times to evaluate the underlying data sources, assumptions, and methodologies. While the majority of assumptions remained unchanged after the team's review, a few impactful factors were recommended for change as seen on this slide. The city chose to incorporate these changes into the final forecast being presented. Overall, these changes reduced the forecast over 5 years by $12 million. These recommendations improve the financial picture, but the structural imbalance, as the city manager mentioned, remains persistent throughout all years of the forecast period. So if you think of the general fund forecast deficit as a range, if you're talking about more aggressive assumptions or more optimistic assumptions and more conservative assumptions, this is at the top of the range of optimistic, just in my perspective. But it was impactful. Specifically, the adjusted forecasted savings rate. If you might remember, when we presented in October, the preliminary forecast included a 4%, 333 for the 5 years of the forecast, as shown here on the slide. The forecast review team recommendation, it is in line with historical results. The forecast review team spent quite a while talking about this, but we landed, and I would say we did somewhat negotiate a little bit on the 5%, 433, just on the near term. More certainty about those costs, more contracts being actually negotiated. We know those COLA increases, and less certainty in the out years of the forecast. And just before we take questions, I just want to walk through those differences because I think it could answer some of those questions. The change was not just related to the forecast review team. So even if we hadn't had that process, you'd still see a shift in the forecast. Here on this slide, you see the indirect cost allocation plan. Some of you are more familiar with this. We've had time to go through it more in depth, but this is basically for internal services, support services in the general fund, like finance, the city manager's office, HRIT. We allocate those costs across all city funds, and then we receive that revenue after it's been allocated out by several different methodologies. So in October, we do not have that piece of work finished. Now we do, and we know that for 2026, we saw $1.1 million additional revenue and the corresponding increase throughout the forecast period. So that was very impactful. The property tax adjustment was a recommendation from the forecast review team. This is an area where we identified it as being a conservative estimate. So in our 5-year forecast, the preliminary result, we were estimating 4.1% increase on the current property tax growth. Historical averages have recently been higher. We've had a few years that are lower, but it felt reasonable to increase that slightly. So this is an increase to 4.35% on that current year property tax growth. Less significant in the near term, so fiscal year 26, 27, but you do see that compounding effect for the out years of the forecast. In the other revenue changes, this is lots of different small changes. As the city manager mentioned, we have better information now than we did in October. State share revenues have slowed, so these recognize reduction of state share revenues and their receipt for the general fund. as well as some internal transfers, some grant payments, things like that, especially for that first and second year of the forecast. On the expenditure side, the forecast review team recommended two of these. The cost of living adjustment for the fourth and fifth year of the forecast, we were using a 3% estimate. So if it was outside of a contract period, using a 3% cost of living adjustment. A little bit more optimistic thinking for the fourth and fifth year of the forecast, that the inflationary pressures might decrease down to a more historical level that we've seen if you stretch out the average a little bit further. So a savings in the fiscal year 2029 and 2030 of the forecast there on that first line. Other operational changes, this ranges in benefit selection. So like many of you, if at your job you have open enrollment, so after open enrollment, we had benefit selections that were actually less expensive, so that contributed quite a bit to this operational change. We also had some revenue and personnel move from the general fund to Fund 310 for our real property services division, just with the organizational shift there. So that represent those other operational changes. And then the most impactful one is that savings rate change from that 44333 to that 55433 that you see there in the bottom. So the overall impact you can see there at the total forecast impact, 3.9, ranging up to 4.8 in the last year of the forecast. And I'll pause here to see if there's any questions.
New member.
Thank you, Chair. Josh, I really just want you to talk a little bit more about the savings rate. Can you talk about it another way? I think when I hear you say it, it kind of gives a number to how much money when we budget for full employment, at the end of the year, we don't spend all of that money. Is that what's being captured there?
That is, so this isn't the full number, this is the change in that savings rate impact. We'll have the full number here in a second, but it reflects that organic vacancy savings. So we budget for full employment. We don't know where the savings might occur. So we have several different departments, police, fire, enterprise services, finance, city manager's office. We don't necessarily know where those vacancies are. So it would be a challenge to reduce the budget at the beginning to account for that, but we make this estimate assumption of those savings that will occur throughout the year. And again, we don't know where they're going to happen, but we anticipate in this case 5% for fiscal year 2026.
So just to follow up, to be clear, because I think we hear this quite a bit, we should unfund vacancies at the start of the budget year that have been vacant for such and such time. But what you're saying is that this savings calculation here captures that at the end of the year when you actually know which positions were vacant, and that's being built into the budget as part of the assumptions what we budget against.
That's absolutely correct. And it's the difference between the adopted fiscal budget and the financial forecast that's really trying to estimate cash flow. So those are the differences. We want to budget for every position. We want to be grounded in what their wages are, what their cost of living is, but then we account for that vacancy savings in this way in the financial forecast. And this is very common practice. I meet regularly with 6 other mid-sized cities in Oregon. There might be some efforts to adjust slightly their budget, on the overtime side, but generally everyone accounts for full employment and then accounts for the savings through forecasting.
Member Brown.
Mr. CFO, I'm missing something, and I think I probably just didn't hear it. So on the revenue changes from fiscal year 26 to 27, we have roughly 446,000, and then we go from that number to 881,000. Did you share with us why there was such a jump in that?
So this is the culmination of probably 20 to 30 individual line item changes, so it's not one specific item. I would say the most impactful is the reduced state share revenue, and I'm happy to provide the detail of where exactly this is by revenue line item. That's not a problem. The jump is really related to transfers, grant funding that we thought we had anticipated to offset. I think the SOS team that is going to be spent by this time period. So it's reduced revenue for fiscal year 2027.
Got it. So it's the makeup. If we didn't get the grants, this is what happens.
So we anticipate the grant funds to be expended. So this is the reality going forward.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Member Manville.
Thank you, Chair. So I feel like I heard you talk about the property tax growth being conservative, and it was somewhat reasonable to bump that up by 0.25%, and that the anticipated savings rate was super optimistic. I'm not sure I heard your 2 cents on the COLA assumption. Like, looking at this chart, I haven't seen a lot of COLAs be that low in the last 8 years. So I'm kind of curious if you have your 2 cents. Is that super optimistic that it would go down that low? Is that, like, what are your 2 cents?
I think I'll go back to what I said in the first couple slides. You know, the forecast does not predict the future. We don't know what costs are going to be. We don't know what we're going to negotiate with bargaining units. I will say that one of the things about the lower coal assumption, it's offset by that lower savings expectation. So those really go hand in hand together. So as you have more uncertainty in the forecast, you give yourself more flexibility, a little more conservative on the savings side to offset that. So for example, if you had a little bit higher COLA, you know, that savings expectation at 3% could accommodate that because the previous year was 4%. So it could accommodate that additional 1%. So it gives you a little bit more flexibility there.
Josh, as a member of the committee, I'll interject myself here. I think there was a lot of conversation about that, and pre-pandemic, 2% COLAs were not that uncommon. And so this has a huge impact on the forecast, and so there was a belief that it was not unrealistic to believe that as time goes on that we should or could return to those levels of COLAs.
That is correct. Yes, it is in the range of possibility.
Thank you, Chair Allen. Josh, how do the adjustments made from the FRT recommendation to this year's forecast compare to adjustments made in the past by other previous forecast review teams?
To my knowledge, we've never had a forecast review team. This was the first year we've ever had that kind of group. And it's actually the first year, to my knowledge, we've had a preliminary forecast. So generally, we present one forecast in December or January, and that is the forecast. So this is the first year we have that dynamic of a preliminary, some kind of review process, and then a final.
Okay, thanks. I have a couple follow-ups. So this is unprecedented, is what I'm hearing. That sets it. How did the public know that they're able to provide input into the forecast? What dates were these meetings held on, and how were we notified?
I don't know. So it was a committee convened by the city manager, so it didn't have to be a public meeting. I don't know, Keith, do you want to speak to that more directly?
Sure. The financial forecast is a product of the city manager's office. It is my recommendation to the budget committee as to where we're going to start this budget process. I invited members of the budget committee, a couple of members from the chamber, and a member from the revenue task force to participate in a body that was making a recommendation to me on how to proceed with our financial forecast and whether or not the assumptions contained within the forecast were reasonable and the outcomes were likely. We chose to take their recommendations. Had their recommendations been unreasonable or outside the realm of reasonability, we wouldn't have taken those recommendations and they wouldn't have been included in this document. But I felt in my position as city manager that they were reasonable, and I took those recommendations and they are included in my financial forecast, which is the basis for our budget going forward.
Okay, so just clarifying that, again, I miss stuff sometimes, so clarifying that it wasn't public, that this was happening at the time. And the members and attendees, like, their names haven't been read out loud in this meeting, are they professional forecasters? Are they experts in budget forecasting, economic forecasting, that sort of thing?
I don't think any of them are experts in that term. The members that participated from the Budget Committee were Member Allen, Member Cohen, and Member Curtis. And the members from the Chamber were members Ricky and Vu, and the member from the Revenue Task Force was
Scott Cantillon.
Yeah, thank you, Scott Cantillon.
We also had member Julie Hoy and member Shane Matthews.
Correct.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, it sounds like a great event and great input was added. Just one final question, kind of a procedural. When you say member, are they acting in their capacity of members of the Budget Committee?
They were acting as advisors to me on a team that I assembled for input on our financial forecast.
But they weren't members of the Budget Committee because it wasn't discussed in the committee meeting, it wasn't voted on who would be there. They weren't representing the Budget Committee, even though it says, like, I mean, Budget Committee member, I get it, but as we hear, people don't always, like, act in their formal capacity unless it's formalized. So I'm just trying to clarify when our friends on the committee were in this, were they acting as city budget committee members?
I invited them to participate because of their knowledge of our budget.
All right, so that clarifies it. Like I said, I just got this at 3:30 and I'm learning it on the fly while we're paying attention to this. So thank you for the context for these changes to Josh's initial and your initial forecast. Thanks.
Member Cohen?
Thank you, Chair. As a member of the forecast review team, I just thought I'd speak to what we kind of discussed. And I'd say, Chair Allen, you have like, what, 25, 30 years of budgetary stuff from school district to Willamette ESD right now, I think, right? I know I've done 6 years at Public Health Division, Oregon Health Authority, $2 billion agency with 1,200 employees. So forecasting, I do forecasting for Oregon psilocybin, Oregon medical marijuana, all sorts of different boards, and I haggle people over forecasting all the time. So we are in good hands, and it was very impactful to hear from our citizen members that were in the business community, because what the business community sees versus what Chair Allen or myself in public see can sometimes be different. Ways in which we approach a problem, ways in which we understand cost allocation is different. And I will not go through what accounting codes are for specific grants, because that is just stuff that makes people go to sleep. What I will say is that we did have a lot of robust conversations. I know that I actually hijacked one meeting, and I point blank said to the members who were from the business community, what do you need in order to believe the forecast? I asked them, how are we not communicating this well enough to you? What barriers are there that prevent the business community or just members of the city from not agreeing with the analysis that is happening? And so we had, as I said, robust conversations in which members were able to talk about different buckets of funding out there. And I think that's where a lot of the confusion lies, is that there are a lot of buckets. If you look at our full enterprise revenue, it's close to $1 billion or something. And
right.
Expenses is 600,000. Or not 600,000, 600 million. So if you just look at that point blank, well, of course we have enough revenue. But then you have to get into the individual buckets and see that not everything for the utility fund can be paid for in the general fund. And so a lot of it is explaining to people the different buckets, the different procedures, that we have to follow the law so that CFO doesn't get arrested. And I think that we were able to break down some of those assumptions. I know we had some of the members of the budget team, CFO's budget team, do a lot of research on property taxes. That was very exhaustive and went through a lot of stuff. We've talked exhaustively about PERS rates, and how that's drastically affecting us. And so there were a lot of different elements to this forecast review team that we went over that I think really hit the mark as far as honing in on what is important for this and to also bring validity to it. And so I can say from those community members, business members, that they agreed with our recommendation, right? No one said nay to this. Yeah, no one said nay to this. And they're not just to the corner coffee shop. One was Bark Boys, which I think is a major bark industry here in Salem, and I forget what the other gentleman does. And so these are businesses that have a lot to do within the city, and I just want to say that we did a lot of work. And so thank you for helping us out, Josh. I know that you guys did a lot of work. I wouldn't say it was fun, but I think that it was necessary, and I stand behind the assumptions and recommendations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Yes, member.
Yeah, I'm interested in the property tax adjustment. How did we get those numbers, and where did those come from?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I think I mentioned, so we estimate property taxes on individual property level. So for the current year, but the property tax growth is an assumption. So you'll see it in the back of the forecast. So we were using a 4.1% current year property tax growth rate, looking at historical averages. And even before the forecast review team, when Callie and I were talking, it was like, okay, well, are we being conservative in any place? That was one where we identified, this probably has some room where you could be a little more aggressive. So adjusting that by 0.2, so going from 4.1 to 4.35% on an annual basis for growth. And that's where you see there in the second line, the property tax adjustment with the $216,000 in fiscal year 2026, and then $1.3 million in fiscal year 30.
Thank you. I was just curious, is it because our property values are increasing more than expected?
To some extent, coincidentally, I had a call with finance directors today, 6 other cities in Oregon. Assessed value growth varies a lot by city. Some cities are in growth mode. So if you're talking about Hillsborough or Bend, you see a much higher growth rate. Here in Salem, we see the 3% statutory increase plus a little bit for new development, infill, new properties. So 4.1 is a pretty conservative number. 4.35 is more in line with recent assessed value growth. Now, putting in a number does not make it happen. So moving it from 4.1 to 4.35 does not guarantee that we'll see that level of growth. But it is a reasonable assumption based on the history there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Allen. Just to piggyback on that, Josh, I'm curious if you can provide in the future, what has been the actual property tax revenue increase? Has it been closer to 4.35? I'm just curious what it's been over the last 5 years in the city of Salem. And I wouldn't expect you to have that off the top of your head right now, but I know we often give the folks here a little homework assignment.
Yeah, we can definitely bring that back. One small piece of context is either the 4.35, I think the average for the last 5 or maybe it was 10 years, was 4.37. So just looking at actuals, so that's why we went with the 4.35.
Excellent. And if I may, thank you. Kind of a related comment. I appreciate folks and your reactions to the forecast review team and in general, a lot of the last minute information you get. On behalf of the City Council and the Mayor, welcome to our world. We routinely get a lot of last minute stuff. It's not ideal. And you are being asked to make a lot of important decisions, but we're not being asked to make any decisions tonight. So this information is last minute for today's meeting, but rest assured, the real decisions will be made at the end of our meetings in May. So I recognize the fact that we're adjusting this forecast. I support the city manager's decision. We just heard about this the other night in a council meeting, that when a city manager forms a group, it's not subject to the same public meetings laws than when city council orders the creation of a group, such as a motion brought by councilors Varney and Matthews. So there is a subtle but important difference to that. But I am thrilled to see that there were so many people from this body, three, a plurality of that group. It comes from this body and in their own individual capacity and with their own experiences to bear. So I hear you. I love to get things in advance too. I came here expecting dinner. Imagine my surprise. We got snacks. And a frantic phone call was made to a certain member of city staff, and I'll just leave it at that. But anyway, I'm keeping my hanger at bay, which is in everyone's best interest. So, thank you.
Councilor Varney, did you have a question?
I did. Thank you very much. And I wanted to say, Vice Chair Cohen, thank you for mentioning PERS, because that's what I was going to ask about. Is not just the PERS, but where do our PERS rate increases, salary step increases, health insurance increases, market adjustments, where do these all show up here? Are they included in that COLA percentage, or do they show up elsewhere?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. So there's an assumptions appendix in the back of the forecast document that details out those increases for each of those line items, but no, they're not built into the COLA adjustment. But so the savings, is that what you're asking about?
Well, just kind of, I know those are additional expenses more than the COLA, and some of them are pretty substantial. So I was just wondering if they're not in the COLA, do they show up here? I don't know where they show up.
Yeah, absolutely. So those assumptions did not change between the preliminary and final for the benefits and cost benefits and PERS rates. We knew those in October. They came out early October. What I will say is the COLA adjustment there is inclusive of all the roll-ups. So when you reduce $1 of wages, you reduce the corresponding, 30% of PERS and the health benefits. So like when we had open enrollment and people changed their benefit election, that was reflective of the assumed benefit rates. So those are all included in the forecast, and then in the COLA adjustment, the associated expenses are changed also.
Okay, so the COLA is just the regular, what it is, just the COLAs for our different contracts. That's what it's referring to, right?
Correct, and any roll-up costs that adjust, FICA, Med, Social Security, Medicare, those adjust with wage changes.
Okay, no, I appreciate it, and thank you for providing the history back to 2008. It's really helpful to see all the different COLAs through time. Appreciate it.
I can't take credit. I'll pass the credit on to HR.
Thanks.
Josh, I'm going to ask what might be a bit of a tricky question. Sorry for not giving you a heads up. So based on this new forecast summary, and I'm only concerned about the year we're going to go into budgeting for, fiscal year 2026, we've improved our outlook from 17 and change to now 13 and change. When will we know if we were right? Like at what point will the forecast become real enough for the city staff? Because we're not saying it's now $4 million cheaper to run the police department, or $4 million cheaper to run the fire department, or now the library only costs $3 million to run. We're saying all those things, that number isn't changing what it costs to run the city. What we're saying is that due to savings and due to additional revenue. But if those things don't turn out to be true, we're still going to need more money to run the city. So when do we know if the forecast is correct?
I really appreciate the question. I think it really speaks to how year-end estimates evolve over time. So you're asking about 2026, but we don't know where we're going to land for 2025. So the current year that we're in, we're continually monitoring with departments. We've made a commitment to land at the fund balance policy for 2025, but that might be through some interesting exercises to reach that savings expectation. But we monitor, we meet with each department every month. We talk through vacancies, we talk through when their hiring dates are, what they have out for recruitment, if they're looking at reclasses or reorganizations. We calculate that into our year-end estimate. So for 2026, the honest answer, we won't know exactly where we're going to land for 2026 until 6 months after the year is over. We'll have a 95% certainty June 30th of 2026. But going in, it's really hard to estimate vacancies. You could talk to any department director. You don't know when someone's going to resign. You don't know when someone's going to retire. Some people give us advance notice. Other times it's not quite as nice as that. So there can be unexpected vacancies, unanticipated savings. I will say 5% is at the high end. It is optimistic. I wouldn't expect more than that, but it could certainly be a little bit lower.
Thanks.
City Manager?
I just want to add on to what Josh is saying there. He quickly skimmed over an important part, and that is we are aiming to, and we are always aiming to, stay within fund balance policy, which is 15% of our budgeted revenues. And we are watching that, and if we need to adjust spending in order to stay within fund balance policy, which is the part that Josh little breezed over there, we will adjust spending in order to do that. I will, as the Chief Executive Officer, say that we are slowing hiring or we're slowing spending on supplies or other services in order to stay within fund balance policy. So we are literally constantly monitoring the status of our budget relative to fund balance and other compliance issues, and we're adjusting the levers accordingly.
Josh, I would only add that I take slight umbrage with your characterization of the 5% as being wildly optimistic.
I don't think I said wildly.
A slight editorialization. The committee did look at 10 years, and the 5% is not completely out of line with what the historical numbers were. I understand the desire to be conservative. I would just say that from my perspective, it wasn't wildly optimistic. There was rationale for it.
Agreed.
And I would ask one follow-up question before we move on. And I may have completely spaced it off or missed it, but it was my recollection in those meetings that there was a change in the urban renewal district assumptions with regards to when they were coming off the rolls, or coming on the rolls, I should say. But I don't see that in your slides, and I thought that there was some significant dollars associated with that.
You're absolutely right. So in the forecast review team, we talked about a lot of different things. Some of them related to the general fund, some of them related to finances. What specifically, we talked about urban rural areas and the potential for stopping collection of tax increment, which would return those areas back to the tax rolls for all jurisdictions, including the city. That policy decision has not been made yet, which is why you don't see it reflected in the forecast. But there is potential for additional general fund revenue, not in fiscal year 2026, but in fiscal year 2027 and 2028 from the Mill Creek URA and North Gateway URA. Potential closure, not closure, but stopping collecting tax increment.
Okay, so I wasn't dreaming. But because action hasn't been taken, you haven't included it yet in the forecast, and it doesn't impact the budget that this group is going to be working on.
It does not. So there's no impact for fiscal year 2026. And I believe on the full page one-page summary that you got at 3:30, it does mention URAs, I think, toward the bottom.
Thank you. Did you have more presentation before we moved on to Public Works Director Mark Bechtel?
Yes, several more slides. Thank you.
Go ahead then.
Some of this is going to be review, so I apologize because we've talked about some of it already. The general fund forecast table, similar to this slide, appear in the forecast document on page 12. At the top is the beginning fund balance equivalent to a checking account or savings account. This balance is important for several reasons. You guys are more familiar than most about those. The first is just a basic cash flow need. The general fund's largest revenue source is property taxes that are received starting in November. The city needs to be able to continue to pay bills and make payroll for July, August, September, and October until those property taxes are received. In fiscal years 2020, 2021, 2022, and again in the current fiscal year 2025, the general fund cash balance went negative in October. The second reason is to be able to respond to the unknown or large fluctuations in expenditures or revenues. And the third is our bond credit rating. Cash on hand is a large factor when a rating agency is evaluating the fiscal health of an entity. We currently maintain a AA2 rating from Moody's, and our bonds are very competitive, largely due to this rating. It saves taxpayers millions of dollars by reducing our cost to borrow. I appreciate that. The second row is the estimated general fund revenues or income that the city receives. The third row is the total expenditures or estimated budget appropriation. This is reduced by the next two lines, the first of which is unspent contingency. We haven't talked too much about that today, but the city budgets for $3 million of contingency. We've budgeted $3 million since, I think, 2018. Before that, it was 2.5. And going back in history, $3 million has seemed to be sufficient. We don't anticipate spending all that contingency, so if we need it for unexpected expense, I referenced the ice storm, wildfires, potentially excess overtime, things like that. We'll come back to the council and ask to use contingency. It's not something we can just access. But we do anticipate of that $3 million, that 2.5 would come back to the general fund. So it gets budgeted, $3 million. If it's not spent, it rolls over to the next year. As we've mentioned, the next row is for organic savings across all general fund departments for vacancies and employee turnover. We budget fully for each position, and we would like for all of them to be filled, but there's natural attrition that creates savings throughout the year. The next row is net expenditures, which is the total expenditures less that contingency and or estimated savings. And then when you subtract the net expenditures from the revenues, you get the fiscal year impact, which is the change in fund balance. So that's how much you're spending in this case. As you can see, the imbalance increases over the 5 years to over $24 million use of fund balance in 2030. Without changes, the city would not be able to adopt the general fund budget in fiscal year 2027. And I should note that 2026 is very tight. It would be a challenge to adopt that budget as presented. The arrows at the bottom of the table represent compliance with the council's general fund balance policy. As mentioned, the 15% of revenues. As I breezed over and the city manager clarified, we are anticipating to end fiscal year 2025 at that fund balance policy. Here's the same display that I presented for the previous funds, and you can see it here for the general fund. You also see the change in fund balance there in the bottom. The council policy is there in yellow, and the beginning fund balance is there in dark green. So same information, different graphical display. And I took the feedback from the preliminary meeting and I included both the table and the graph. This slide shows some substantial history since 2010. The City Council and Budget Committee have a strong history of fiscal management that uses both reductions in expenses and increases in revenues to balance the budget. This graph illustrates recent revenue and expenditure history in the general fund and the result of the 5-year forecast. It notes the impact of several significant actions over the past several years, including the closure of fire stations, elimination of approximately 40 positions in the fund about 11 years ago, and 4 years of legislated PERS rate relief. During the period of PERS rate relief, the city also gained revenue from a real market valuation reset and significantly less property tax losses from compression. So there's a lot to unpack there. You might remember there was a court decision that reduced PERS expenses for employers. We continued to budget at the higher level. That court case did get overturned. So we had the funds on hand to make up the difference in the next couple of years of those increased PERS rates. And then the property tax reset, during the recession, assessed value and real market value, it really impacts our property tax revenue. Assessed value went down and met real market value in a lot of cases, so we saw a lot of compression. So for those few years after the recession, as real market value housing prices went up, we saw that revenue reset. We never saw property tax revenue go down, but we saw it increase greater in those years after the recession. You will also see the reopening of the 2 fire stations in fiscal year 2017 and 2019, as well as the start of the homeless rental assistance program. And then beginning in 2020, we see the positive impact of the city operations fee that narrowed the gap between revenues and expenses, and then the CARES Act and ARPA funding due to COVID show a short-term infusion of funds in fiscal years 2020, 2021, and 2022. As you can see, the revenues and expenditure lines are growing further apart as expenditure growth continues to outpace growth in revenues. This graph also includes the positive impact from the Budget Committee's decision to use one-time ARPA funding in the Transient Occupancy Tax Fund last year to cover $1.6 million of library and parks expenses. So that does impact the budget and budget history. This graph you've seen for the 2 previous funds. Again, you see in blue the probable result if no action is taken. In green, you see a 2% positive, 1% revenues, 1% additional savings. In green, and then in red, you see 1% less savings and 1% more expenses. In all 3 cases, your negative fund balance in fiscal year 2028, with 2027 beginning fund balance at a slight positive with that 2% shift. So when you're looking at that 2% variation, that doesn't feel like a lot, but it's pretty impactful for the general fund. I'm happy to answer any questions.
All right, Member Brown.
Thank you, Chair. So CFO, I have a question, and you may have answered it before, so my apologies if I'm asking you to repeat yourself. So the city manager mentioned that we went from like that 17.7 million to where we were, and now we're down to like 13.8. Can you explain how we found that, please? Because maybe I missed it.
Yeah, I apologize. So that is this slide right here. So you can see the revenue changes and the expenditure changes between the preliminary forecast we presented on October 30th and the forecast you see today. So total there at the bottom, $3.9 million shift. The ones highlighted in yellow were recommendations from the forecast review team that we chose to incorporate in the forecast. And the other ones were new information since October 30th.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Are there other questions for the CFO at this time?
Thank you, Chair. In recent communication materials from the city, we've talked about $4 million or so in cuts that happened last year, but I didn't see them on your slide. Are those taken into consideration? Or to me, that seems like people want to know that we're finding efficiencies, making cuts to the budget. Can you talk a little bit about that in respect to this slide?
Yeah, absolutely. I apologize those aren't referenced. They are incorporated into the data. So in fiscal year 2024, we did mid-year reductions at the council level, over $4 million. Some of them were new positions that had never been filled. Some were existing positions in the library and police. And then in 2025, there were reductions in the general fund that are not reflected on this slide. And those are the ones that you all discussed and added some of them back, but there will still were substantial shifts. The homeless rental assistance program, our social service grants, some of the Center 50 Plus funding. There were also some revenue adjustments. So I do apologize, those are not reflected on this graphic.
May I follow, please? I just, the reason I ask is because these mid-year adjustments seem to reflect when the forecast isn't correct and things cost more than we expect, or we have more employees retained, which is what we want. We want employees to stick around. At some point, we have to make an adjustment. And so historically, how many adjustments have we made? In the last couple of years, it sounds like we've made at least 2 mid-year adjustments based on reality as it's come in. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay.
Generally, the changes do happen at the budget committee level. So they happen on an annual basis.
Well, they happen before.
Correct, yes.
Yeah, okay. I think the point I'm trying to make for the committee is that if you rely on the rosiest part of your forecast, or the most optimistic view, and things don't turn out that way, and you've already spent half your money, the ability to close the gap is much more difficult halfway through the year than it is were you to make the choices, difficult choices, at the beginning of the year. And so I fear a little bit about, I like the forecast, but I fear it could put us in a difficult spot.
Counselor?
Thank you. Yeah, kind of related to that, I was thinking the same thing. I'm still trying to wrap my head around the vacancy savings. So the estimated savings is 9.88 million. What happens if we fill a third of those positions?
So there's definitely some tension here in goals, right? So savings are good in one way because you have dollars for the next year. We count on those vacancy savings because they've historically happened. So we're assuming that vacancy savings. We also want to get positions filled, right? So they're budgeted. We'd like for the fire department and the police department to be fully staffed. We'd like to have that service level increase. So there's always going to be that tension between that savings amount and getting positions hired. But there are always also going to be savings. There's going to be transitions in positions. We work closely with departments. There's not been a year where anyone's been fully staffed all year long, especially in the larger departments.
Member Matthews.
Simply because it seems like we, have some question on the optimism of that, well, not just the forecast, but really of the vacancy and supply savings. I know that during those meetings, you had a chart that basically showed the historical average. I think Chair Allen mentioned that earlier. Seems like you have it right here. That's what I was going to ask for. That's great. That's it. Done.
Yeah, I appreciate the question, and I did anticipate. I apologize it's not included in your packet because I anticipated it at around 5 o'clock. So I did add it into the slide deck, but as you can see there are years with lower savings. There are years with higher savings rate.
I believe the city manager wants to comment on that.
Just by way of illustration, today I had my one-on-one meeting with the police chief, and we were talking about his vacancy rate, and he had a record hiring year this year, but he also had a very high attrition rate this year, and he ended up 1 positive. So started the year with, I don't know, let's say 23 vacancies, ended the year with 22 vacancies, but hired 22 new officers, but had 23 retirees and people leaving the force. So,
Member Nordyke.
Thank you. Josh, I want to go back to a comment you just made about vacancy rates. Did you say that there hasn't, I want you to repeat that so that I can draw upon it. You're talking about departments have not had full employment. I want you to say that again.
Yeah, absolutely. So the city, in our forecasting, we anticipate vacancies, and then we meet with departments monthly, generally, to go through what those vacancies are. And I think it's like the city manager just mentioned, we have every intention of filling positions, but there's this natural attrition that's going to happen. So there's always going to be some level of vacancies.
And so, I think the reason I kind of hit upon that, or the reason that matters to me, is that when I talk to people in the community, people are often under the assumption that we're just now making cuts, we're just now doing things on a reduced capacity. But the reality is we haven't had full employment in any of our major departments for quite some time. Is that true?
Yes, that is true. But there's even with all the funding, you're still going to see some level of vacancy. So it's not lack of effort for hiring those positions. We don't hold positions open for savings.
Okay.
We'd like them to be filled.
Okay. I think that a lot of voters are under the impression that we're operating at full capacity all the time. I think most people don't know that there's always going to be a natural vacancy rate with large organizations. So I hear what you're saying there. But it's just helpful for me to understand these things as I talk to people in the community. Thank you.
Former Chair Brown.
Thank you, Chair. Maybe I should cut an album or something, right? The artist formerly known as. So, and I want to follow Member Nordike's her train of thinking there. So it goes back to vacancies, right? And so the previous council, there were some vacancies that were not filled, and they were on PD's budget, right? And I'm only saying this because I think sometimes the general public, they don't retain everything that we retain, or that we say here. I don't even remember all the things that we say here, so I try my best with that. And so with those vacancies, when you take away 3 or 4 or 5 vacancies from PD or even FD, can you explain to us how difficult it is to get those, A, and then B, and I agree with Member Nordike, because the community, they really think that we have been operating at a very high level capacity, and that's just not true. And so part of me says, explain to us how those vacancies, what would it be like to bring them back, if that's even possible? And then can you just share with us a little bit about when we're not at our best level, right? We can't do the best work. And so can you walk us through that? Because again, that's where my concern is going to go, because there was some community members here tonight, their input was, we just have too many first responders. And I disagree with that 100%.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I'm not sure I'm the exact person that should be responding. I feel like it's each department director that could respond to that. I mean, in general, when we have a vacancy specifically, for the fire department, we cover it with overtime. So we maintain minimum staffing, 43 personnel on at any given hour. So if we have a vacancy there, there's no savings for the fire department. The police is a little different, and the police chief could come and speak to that specifically. But vacancies do have a profound impact on our financials and on our operations.
And I would say that this is something we discussed last year, and either you or maybe the chief can say this. I can say it, I know the answer to it, but I'm not going to say it. So when we start talking about overtime, there is something that PD and FD, they say this frequently, it's a mandatory overtime. And mandatory overtime, it means that we don't have enough people to fulfill that particular role. And so when people say, oh, we need to quit paying overtime, there's too much money for overtime. Well, that's not true. We just don't have enough bodies to do the work. So is that a fair statement, or am I just speaking things out of the air?
I believe it's a fair statement. So if we have minimum staffing requirements, we're going to ask for volunteers first for overtime, and then if needed, you mandatory overtime.
And we have enough, I would say, cushion in our budget to handle mandatory overtime, or do we not?
Yeah, it's a nuanced question. So overtime, there's always going to be some level. There's a balance between being fully staffed and having overtime versus personnel. So there's always going to be overtime for special instances. Like for the fire department, if they're down employees, we're not going to see budget savings because they're going to cover it with overtime. The police department operates a little differently. There might be savings there. But it just rolls into fund balance and is there for the following year.
And I think one of the things that we may have to consider at least for us here at the committee, like, we can digest that and we can process it fairly easy. I think as we come back here, weeks down the road, it may be healthy for us just to share with the community what that means and what that looks like. Because when you say mandatory overtime, some people think, well, I'm just going to work a few extra hours. No, that's not what that really means at all. And so part of me says, I think we'll have to do a lot of re-educating the community just so that we can, kind of like regain their trust in that area. So thank you.
Member Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Josh, would you share your slide deck with us after the meeting?
Absolutely.
PowerPoint or whatever. Thank you.
I'm going to interject very quickly with regard to some of the work that the advisory group did. And 2 points. One was there's tension between being conservative for all the reasons why being conservative is important. That was tempered in the group by not wanting to seem as if the city continues to cry wolf, where we say that it's an $18 million shortfall, and then it turns out only to be a $15 or $13 million shortfall. That creates problems and confidence with the public. Obviously, there's no desire to underestimate and then have a cash flow or a cash issue or an imbalance. But there's a tension there between wanting to have a realistic number so that we don't have the cry wolf syndrome versus the conservative so that you have the cushion. And just a reminder that the task force made recommendations. Whatever was presented tonight is owned by the city manager. Those were only recommendations that the task force made. Are there any other questions before we move on to the next section? Mr. CFO, were you done with your portion? Okay, thank you. And there will be more opportunities for questions at the end. We'll now move on to the Transportation Fund with a presentation by Assistant Public Works Director Mark Bechtel.
I don't get a cool headset like Josh does. Good evening, Chair Allen and Budget Committee members. I'm Mark Bechtel. I'm the Assistant Public Works Director over Operations. And I'd like to take this opportunity this evening to provide you with an overview of the Transportation Services Fund 155 and outline some of the challenges facing the fund over this 5-year forecast period. This presentation will focus almost entirely on the operations and maintenance aspect of transportation funding that is supported through Fund 155 and will not address capital construction funding for transportation that's handled through system development charges or bonds or federal grants. Most people think of the Transportation Services Fund as the street paving fund. However, the fund provides resources for a wide variety of transportation services, including street pavement maintenance, alley maintenance, traffic signal operations, street signs and pavement markings, bicycle facilities, sidewalk repair and pedestrian safety, street trees, landscape maintenance in the right-of-way and right-of-way cleaning, transportation planning, and traffic engineering services, winter storm response and traffic incident response, and then utility trench patching and repair and street sweeping. So it's a wide variety of services that we provide out of this fund. The slide you see before you contains a detailed inventory of a number of the transportation assets that we operate and maintain. And when you get your paper copy of the slide deck, please take an opportunity to look at all those assets that we provide services for. The Transportation Services Fund has budgeted $19.6 million in expenditures for fiscal year 25. Some of the largest program budgets include roadway surface maintenance, traffic signal operations and maintenance, and sidewalk maintenance. Fund 155 has budgeted revenues of $19.2 million in fiscal year 25. Note that budgeted expenditures exceed revenues by approximately $400,000, which may decrease working capital depending upon the amount of savings realized during the fiscal year. 3/4 of the revenues that come into Fund 155 are the city's allocation of state highway funds. Transfers from the utility fund make up the next largest revenue source. Utility funds are used primarily to fund repairs to streets, curbs, and sidewalks, resulting from underground utility repairs and street sweeping services. Other revenue sources include permit fees, grants, and fees for services provided to other departments. With the fund's heavy dependence on state highway fund revenue, it is important to understand how that particular funding source works. The State Highway Fund is administered by the state of Oregon and is comprised of several revenue components: fuel taxes from passenger vehicles, weight mile taxes paid from heavy commercial vehicles, and then DMV fees, which include your title and vehicle registration fees, a special electric vehicle or EV registration fee, driver's license fees, and trip permit fees. After the costs of fund administration, special programs, and certain debt services are subtracted, the remaining funds are allocated on a percentage basis, with 50% going to ODOT, 30% to counties, and 20% to cities. The county's share is apportioned to individual counties by road miles, and the city's share is apportioned to individual cities by population. The growing number of fuel-efficient vehicles, hybrid vehicles, and electric vehicles has begun to flatten the fund's revenues and is currently not keeping up with inflationary costs or the transportation needs of the state. As presented to you earlier, the Transportation Services Fund will likely see expenditures exceed revenues during all 5 years of the forecast period. If revenues remain as forecasted by the state of Oregon, that will be the case. The last 2 years of the forecast period would see working capital exhausted. As each fiscal year ends, beginning fund balances will reduce working capital until it goes negative in fiscal years 29 and fiscal years 30. This forecast assumes no new additional positions to the Transportation Services Fund work units, minimal capital outlay, and minimal vehicle replacements. Unless there is an increase of an average of about $2.6 million in annual revenues, significant reductions may need to occur in our transportation programs. So as we evaluate the health and the status of Fund 155, we need to take a good look at the operations and maintenance needs of our transportation system and see if we are meeting our needs with current expenditure levels or are we falling behind. One highly visible transportation asset is our street pavements. The city has 1,250 lane miles of streets within its maintenance jurisdiction. A lane mile is essentially one travel lane, the width of one travel lane 1 mile long. Our street pavements alone represent a $2.3 billion investment in our community. In 2023, we completed a comprehensive pavement condition survey of all of our Salem streets. The condition survey indicates that 53% of all our streets pavements are in good or better condition, 30% are in fair condition, and 16% are in poor condition. However, 16% still represents 195 lane miles of poor condition street pavements. Our overall composite score is a 61 out of 100, which doesn't get you a college degree by any means on those grades. It puts us on the cusp between fair and good overall condition. If you break the overall condition assessment into street classifications, you see that our arterial and collector level streets are in better condition than our local residential streets. 21% of our local street lane miles are in poor condition. And you'd note that our local streets account for twice the lane miles of our arterial street system. Every 2 years, we are required to submit to ODOT a pavement condition survey of our arterial and collector streets. If you look at the last 8 years, the miles of arterials and collectors in good condition has steadily declined, and the arterials and collectors in fair or poor condition have increased. This reflects the impact of high inflationary costs for materials and relatively flat revenues, which has limited our ability to fund pavement maintenance treatments. You've probably heard the phrase, "You can pay me now or you can really pay me later." Well, that applies to street pavements. The graph you see before you shows how a typical asphalt pavement's condition will degrade under traffic loads, age, temperature, and weather over time. The condition degrades slowly, then after a certain point degrades more rapidly. Once the condition of the pavements begins to rapidly deteriorate, it requires expensive rehabilitation and ultimately pavement reconstruction. The costs of both treatments are considerable and usually result in capital construction projects. However, you can extend the life of the pavement if you apply relatively inexpensive preventative maintenance treatments such as crack seals, slurry seals, chip seals, fog seals, any kind of seals you can think of will help you prevent some of the deterioration of the surface of the pavement. If you make corrective measures as soon as they are needed, such as patching potholes or milling and inlaying sections of deteriorating pavement, you can avoid the more expensive pavement treatments. The catch is, if you don't invest in preventative maintenance, you will spend all of your limited funding on rehabilitation and reconstruction projects, never getting ahead of the cycle or getting ahead of the game. At the City of Salem, we are able to spread our resources across the spectrum of treatments and have avoided major pavement reconstructions, but we spend very little money on preventative maintenance compared to what is needed. In 2024, the Public Works Department conducted a study of the financial needs of our overall transportation system. Based on our draft study, we estimate it would take an investment of $357 million in 2024 dollars to bring all of our pavements up to optimal condition. Spread over 15 years, that would be about $23.8 million per year, not accounting for inflation. To bring our pavements up to good condition would require a little over $307 million or $20.5 million annually over 15 years. And just to bring all of our pavements up to at least fair condition level would take $154.5 million or a little over $10 million a year over 15 years. So that's just pavements. Let's quickly change gears and go over to our sidewalk system. The City of Salem has 826 miles of sidewalks in our street system. In 2007, the city adopted an ordinance that assigns maintenance responsibility for sidewalks by property frontage. If your sidewalk was built after 1992, the abutting property owner is responsible for repairing the sidewalk unless it has been damaged by a city street tree. Sidewalks built prior to 1992 are to be repaired by the city. Once repaired, they are assigned to the abutting property owner for future maintenance unless the damage is caused by a city street tree. Currently, of the nearly 37,000 properties that have frontages with sidewalks, nearly 21,000 frontages have sidewalks with defects, or about 57%. The remaining 16,000 property frontages meet standards and have been assigned to the abutting property owners for future sidewalk repair responsibility unless the damage is caused by a city street tree. City crews and contractors complete an average of 1.76 miles of sidewalk repairs per year. So if you took all those sidewalk panels and lined them up, that's how long it would be, or about 5% of the existing backlog annually. So if you would think that at 5% a year, within 20 years, we'll have the problem solved, except that over those 20 years, all those street trees continue to grow and lift up the sidewalks and create more problems. So it's kind of like painting the Golden Gate Bridge. Once you get done, you start over again and just keep going. We won't go into all the other programs, but this slide shows you some of the other key programs that we provide services for and what it would take to provide an optimal level of service, an adequate level of service, or what we call moving towards adequate. So, you know, you could say that's fair, moving towards good. And then you can see how much we currently spend on each of those programs within Fund 155. It does not include capital construction funding in some of these areas, just operations and maintenance. When you take all the transportation services programs together comprehensively, you first see that this is not just a street pavement maintenance problem, nor is it just a sidewalk repair problem, but all across our different service levels and service programs, we have an annual revenue gap. And just to maintain the status quo, again, I will say we need about $2.6 million on the average annually to maintain just the level service we provide now, which probably will not reverse those degradations in pavement maintenance and other service gaps that you see. Not going to talk about optimal level of service because no city could ever provide an optimal level of service. It's just there as a kind of a bookend of what the other end of the world would be if it was perfect. So what is doable? The additional $2.6 million annually will be needed to avoid significant program reductions. An additional $9.1 million is attainable if certain funding measures were explored and pursued. I'm just going to finish up with a little bit of discussion on where we are with funding options, both at the state level and what could be available to the city to explore. There is considerable interest in putting forward a transportation funding package as part of this year's 2025 legislative session. The last large funding package that came from the legislature was in 2017. That package raised about $5.7 billion in additional revenue and raised fuel taxes incrementally over a series of several years. There is interest within the legislature of doing something similar again in this session with existing revenue sources, as well as exploring imposing one or more new types of revenue sources statewide. I've listed some of those up there on the slide. Most of these potential funding sources would either not raise significant revenue or would compete directly with existing local government revenues. However, there is a strong desire to increase the EV registration fees to bring them in line with what the internal combustion engine vehicle owners pay in fuel taxes. Right now, the EV registration fee is only covering about a third of what the average regular traditional combustion engine vehicle is paying in taxes. EVs are also heavier vehicles and theoretically put more weight on the pavements. Ultimately, the legislature is going to need to consider the idea of what to do with the fuel tax, whether to continue that in some manner or to look at a way of charging people for the number of miles they drive on the system versus how they fuel their vehicles. And so the legislature does not appear to be ready to take that on in this session, so we'll just have to see. With our dependence on the State Highway Fund for so much of our revenue, we are dependent on the actions of the legislature. The increases in state highway funds are historically modest and never do more than get us out of the funding bind we are in at the moment. It never puts us on a path forward to increasing any levels of service. However, there are some options that could be considered that the City of Salem could take on its own to increase revenue outside of its allocation of state highway funds. Currently, 30 Oregon cities collect a local option fuel tax. Imposition of a local option fuel tax requires a successful vote from the voters in an election. It was estimated in 2021 that for every cent per gallon collected in Salem, it would generate $650,000 in revenue for Fund 155. We would need a minimum of 4 cents of local option fuel tax per gallon to close the current $2.6 million funding gap. There are 18 cities in Oregon that have imposed street utility fees or transportation fees, which are based on the number of vehicle trips generated by the general category of property land use types in the city. So if you have a single family home, for example, in Bend, you pay $6.50 a month for the trips that your single family home generates, on any given day. And it's a fee that's attached to your utility bill. Marion or Polk counties could impose a county vehicle registration fee that they could keep or share an apportioned amount to member cities. However, keep in mind that the legislature set us up back in the 1800s that we don't have any county roads within the city limits of Salem. So there would have no reason to apportion anything to us since we have no county roads within the city limits. 3 counties do impose a county registration vehicle fee, and that's the 3 Portland metropolitan counties, Clackamas, Multnomah, and Washington. One short-term option to take pressure off of Fund 155 would be to make street tree and right-of-way landscaping maintenance a stormwater quality supportive program and to fund its $1.2 million annual cost through the utility fund. However, this would require a corresponding increase in utility rates to cover that cost. And then finally, another way to take pressure off of Fund 155 would be to transition a greater portion of sidewalk repair responsibility to abutting property owners and less responsibility to the city. The effort, if directed to do so, would require probably a public process and a study to see how that could move forward. So I can't give you a dollar amount of what that would save us. So, Budget Committee members, thank you for your patience through this long meeting tonight and through my presentation. I hope that you have gained a greater understanding of Fund 155 and the challenges facing the Transportation Services Fund. Do you have any questions?
Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Chair. So, Mr. Bechtel, you just said that back in the 1800s, that all the streets, Salem owns them all?
The historical legend, whether it's true or not, is that the legislature back in the 1800s sometime did not want the city of Salem, the capital city, to be beholden to any one county politically, and so therefore it set it up as a unique city where only state highways and city streets could exist within its city limits.
But that could change if we had legislative support, couldn't it?
I imagine it could,
Well,
yeah.
I mean, it's 1800s. I wouldn't even thought of back then, let alone welcomed in this state.
I think you would have to interest one of our counties in wanting to take on any of our roads. Yeah.
Oh, so, okay, well, this could be a long discussion tonight, Madam Mayor. So I have a question. So if we own them all, and when you go to, the northeast side, over there on Lancaster, and you on one side of the street, it's city property, 15 feet over, it's county. Mm-hmm. We pay for all of that. Is that what you're saying?
No, within our city limits.
Within our city limits.
Within our city limits. Not the urban growth boundary, the city limits.
So I think the notes that you have, I think we need a copy of those notes because you gave us a lot of good facts, and there's no way I could retain all that information.
We can make this available to you.
Oh, perfect. That's really good. That would be a huge plus. And then one final question, I'll be done. Can you explain a little bit more? You mentioned about EVs and how that's kind of like flattened the growth. Can you kind of break that down a little bit more, please?
I don't have any percentages to give you other than just as the fleet, the overall fleet of fuel-efficient vehicles or alternative fuel vehicles like EVs or hybrids, as their numbers grow, they're buying less and less fuel at gas stations, paying less gas tax. Mm-hmm. Other than a vehicle registration fee that is only about a third of what everybody else is paying, they're getting essentially a free ride other than that fee that they pay. So the legislature, I've been able to serve on the League of Oregon Cities Transportation Committee and a work group with the legislature, and one of the things that the legislature is interested in is bringing some equality to that equation there. And
That's a good plan. Okay, I'm done. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The chair recognizes Mayor Hoy.
Thank you, sir. To the question about who owns the street, if my house is in the city and the property across the street is in the county and the neighbor to my east is in the county, that's city street?
That's usually determined at point of annexation, where the new boundary is of the street. So when both sides of the street are now within the city, then all of that street is within the city. You'd have to ask the planning department what happens.
It's okay.
if it's split.
As you were talking about it, I'm like, okay, what about my house? You know, the street in front anyway. Thank you so much.
Member Nordyke.
First of all, I'd love to go on the record and say I own an EV and I would be more than happy to pay my fair share, which I'm not currently. So yes, I'm more than happy to support that. I think that should be done. Going back to the potential revenue sources slide, you talked about a potential statewide retail delivery fee. Are any cities considering a citywide retail delivery fee as a way to raise revenue?
Not that were brought up in the committees that I sat on. That was a unique idea that was being considered statewide. The ones that would compete with existing local fees would be car rental. A statewide car rental fee would compete with cities that charge a rental fee tax. Also, let's see here. Retail delivery fees. That is something that a couple of cities in the country have been looking at doing. So for example, if Amazon, FedEx, UPS show up at your door, every delivery you pay a surcharge to the state. There are some cities that are already charging that type of fee. Another one was a shared ride fee. So for example, every Uber or Lyft or taxi ride would pay a surcharge to the state. And again, some cities are charging a local shared ride fee.
Good to know.
We'll go over here.
Yes, suggestion in the form of a question. When you read through the 2023 pavement condition and you said 52% were good and 25% were fair, I thought you were going to say 21% are in Ward 1. But it does bring up a point in that I think it'd be really interesting to see your 2023 pavement condition data geospatially represented so people could understand, because I don't think it's uniform that this is the condition across the entire city, that in every neighborhood we've got half of the streets are pretty good, a quarter are not so great, and a quarter are poor. I think it's, falls differently across neighborhood to neighborhood.
We may have the ability to show that. We'd have to look at our GIS layer and see if that's something that would make sense to display, but yeah.
Councilor Gwynn.
I just had a question. On the major programs slide, you have bridge maintenance that optimal would be $900,000 per year. And we're currently spending $100,000 per year, right? Am I reading that right?
That's correct.
So I'm just curious, how many bridges in Salem, because I know some of them are ODOT bridges, but I'm just curious, especially after we just had a bridge collapse south of us, how many bridges in Salem?
There's 57 bridges in Salem that are in our jurisdiction that we are responsible for the maintenance of. That number is a small number for bridge maintenance because that's just operations and maintenance. So that's relatively small and minor repairs to our bridges. When you're looking at bridge repairs, those tend to be capital construction projects, and they need larger funding sources like a bond measure, like federal or state grants. Bridges tend to run well along in their lifespan before we have to do something major. If they become weight posted, then they become a priority. They also become priority for state and federal funding at that point. So we don't spend a lot of money on the minor maintenance, but when a bridge does need major maintenance, it's very expensive.
Thank you, Chair. I've got several questions or suggestions that I'd like to go over. Regarding revenue, one that I particularly like is one that I had imposed on me when I lived in Norfolk, Virginia. It was a vehicle safety fee. And Mr. Police Chief, I can't tell you how many vehicles I see operating in the city of Salem that are hazardous to the people of the city, and it is ridiculous. I've seen, I actually turned and rubbernecked because the person driving opposite from me, their windshield was completely gone, and they were driving with a motorcycle helmet inside a van. I've seen cars that have been smashed up, brake lights that are out, headlights that are out. So not only is this a vehicle safety thing, but because of the number of pedestrian deaths within this city that have increased, it is paramount for us to, in some form or fashion, ensure that the people operating these vehicles do so in a safe manner. So that it's not necessarily just us imposing a fee on you, it is ensuring that people comply with the written laws as they are and that our community is safe. And so that, I think, for me was like $35 a month. And I think where the big money comes is when we charge the auto dealers, repair shops, the ability to license us. And we charge them more because they get more revenue from people having to come in. Whether you have an EV or an ICE car, you still have headlights, you still have brakes, you still have all these kind of things that every car needs, as opposed to a gas tax, which first of all is regressive. And so that is not very equitable for us. And secondly, it really does favor people who have EVs. So I would look into a vehicle safety fee for the safety of our community and as a way to not have a gas tax. I lived in Chicago for 6 years, and we joked that there are two seasons, winter and construction. As we deal with the effects of climate change and cities are having to become more resilient and adaptive to the situations that are coming, what are ways, and has the Public Works Department researched asphalt quality? Because some of the things that we've actually discovered in Chicago and other areas that, they're icy, so they salt the crap out of them, and then, you have potholes, and then it just goes on and on and on. Is there a way that we can ensure and tell our citizens that we are putting good asphalt down so that we're not paying for an inferior product, so that it, in the end, saves us money? Another thing that I want us to consider is when we look at some of the, are there single-use vehicles that the Public Works can do without? For instance, I don't know, do we own a snowplow? If we own a snowplow and we only use it like once out of 365 days of the year, is that really a good piece of equipment to have? Are there ways in which we could trim some of the other equipment that maybe is single use or monthly use, or is there a way that we can share with some other communities? So just things in which we can look at streamlining. I'd like to hear what you have to say.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, first, asphalt mixes. Most asphalt mixes are based on ODOT specifications for mixes. They have the laboratories and the engineering and they work with the local suppliers and asphalt plants. And so we tend to specify a certain type of asphalt mix that's to ODOT specs that meets our needs based on the project that we're building. So, if the asphalt's good enough for ODOT, the idea is it's probably good enough for us. So, over time, as asphalt changed, yes, there's the degrees of oil and fillers and mixers and binders and aggregate have all kind of changed, but we tend to follow ODOT on that. As far as single-use vehicles, we're a pretty modular organization. You may see other organizations, for example, like ODOT, that has dedicated snow equipment. That's all that equipment does is just deal with snow and ice. All of our snow plows are blades that we attach to our standard dump trucks. So that heavy dump truck is used every single day of the year doing some kind of maintenance work on the streets. And then when it snows, we attach the blade in front, a sander in the back, and de-icer tanks on the side. So one of the things that we do is we watch the weather very closely about 3 days before a storm. If we have that kind of notice, you'll see us rigging up our equipment, turning it from a pothole patching dump truck to a snowplow response vehicle. So we really don't have any single purpose vehicles for snow and ice.
Okay, I believe it was Member Manville and then Member Curtis.
Thank you, Member Curtis and Chair. So one of the things that I didn't see in your presentation was a discussion of the huge expenditures that are a part of the transportation discussions. Most notably, the most expensive transportation project in Oregon history, the most expensive public works project in Oregon history, which is a 5-mile highway expansion with 7 highway interchanges and a new bridge over the Columbia. And I'm concerned that and the Rose Quarter project and other projects to expand highways during a climate crisis are going to cause major problems for cities in the long run. Just as we've seen measures 5 and 50 really hamstrung us, we seem to be unwilling to have fiscal restraint when it comes to highway expansions. And I'm concerned that cities like ours aren't saying we actually can't afford to maintain what we have, as a state, as a city as well. So it's kind of a comment, it's a concern, it's a raising the flag that WashDOT has kind of, Washington DOT has kind of led the path, and by 2035, 75% of WashDOT's gas tax revenues are going to be for debt, 75% of their gas tax, and we're headed down that same path. Not quite as quickly as WashDOT, but it's pretty concerning, and it doesn't feel like the League of Cities or others are saying, hey, we'd love to have new stuff, but we can't afford a $10 billion project here and another $1 billion project here. Has that been raising that concern, has that kind of opportunity cost, like they've issued $1 billion in general fund bonds to back the interstate bridge replacement. That's preventing us from getting a fee in lieu because it's general fund money. So we've been desperate as our budget committee to get that fee in lieu. And it's going to cause major problems in the gas tax support, long range for a generation in Oregon. Has that kind of opportunity cost of funding those huge highway projects been a part of the conversation in the League of Oregon Cities, and have cities said that's actually a big problem because we can't do the projects we need or maintain the roads we have here?
Yeah, you just discussed one of the major points of discussion that we've just had with the League of Oregon Cities, Association of Oregon Counties, and the work groups that the Joint Transportation Committee of the Legislature was dealing with. What you have is a conundrum. You have inflationary impacted maintenance operations and maintenance costs that ODOT can't keep up with. Cities and counties are falling behind. You also have a lot of debt service from past projects. There's projects that are not yet built that have been promised. And you have a desire for more capital expenditure for projects such as the bridge over the Columbia. The issue of tolling has been a big issue in the Portland metropolitan area. It was going to be considered for funding some of the improvements to Interstate 205. That the state backed off of that because of some considerations of impact to cities and local surface streets. So there was a lot of discussion about what would be fair, what is a fair allocation of funding. Cities and counties, we live and hopefully do not die by that 50-30-20 allocation formula. And one of the things that you will see the League of Oregon Cities and the Association of Oregon Counties fight strenuously for is to maintain that 50-30-20 allocation formula and not allow cities to be shortchanged or counties to be shortchanged.
Member Curtis.
I want to make one comment. Excuse me. Your presentation was excellent. I just want to commend you for being clear. I understood everything that we went through except for one thing. And I just really appreciate that. It's a great job. What are transfers? Because obviously 75% of our funding for transportation comes from the state. So if we're looking at needing more money, there's another 25% or 19 as transfers. So where can we really make a difference without nickel and diming our local citizens, for a fee here and a fee there and a fee, basically 75% comes from the state.
Yeah, our transfers are largely transfers from the city's utility fund to the street maintenance operations unit to make repairs to the street system. Whenever we dig up a pipe, we create a trench. We may dig up a sidewalk or a curb or a gutter or part of a street. All that work that we do to replace that damage is funded by the utility because the utility caused the damage to the street. Also, street sweeping is a requirement of our stormwater permit from DEQ. So that's funded by the utility fund as well. So that transfer of funds is really just coming from the utility fund for us to do work for, on behalf of those other activities.
So one more question. So there's not a lot of wiggle room there as to how we could increase that percentage?
The only way to increase that percentage would be if we decided that taking care of our street trees and the landscaping within the rights of way would be an aid to increasing and improving stormwater quality. If that's the case, that would also help us meet our stormwater requirements, our permit requirements from DEQ. So that would justify the expenditure of utility funds for that activity. But that needs to be something taken and dealt with thoughtfully, and keeping in mind that the utility would need to then make up that revenue through a future utility rate increase. So you're kind of rearranging.
Right. Yeah. Thank you.
Councilor Matthews.
I tend to agree with Councilor Tigan. I suppose we don't see the geotechnical actual map to be able to see it, but likely there's a disproportionate amount of pavement and sidewalks in certain areas that are in worse condition than others. And so I guess, and I'm not sure who the right person is to direct this question to, but if it does kind of come out that there's larger sections of town that are, or certain sections of town that have that more degradation, is that something that URA, if it was in the initial plan, would be able to address?
Kristen might be able to help out here as far as being our resident expert on URA. It would depend on where the disparity was located.
Paving gets to be a little bit tricky with urban renewal because urban renewal can be used for capital investment and infrastructure. It's not to be used for maintenance and repairs. And so just a repaving, patching, that sort of thing would fall under maintenance repairs. If you were doing a major rebuild of a road, then it would cross the threshold to a qualifying expenditure for urban renewal. And again, it would have to be within the urban renewal area.
And then I would add that we pay very particular attention when we put together our paving program for each summer paving season. We apply what we call geographic equity to that paving list. We look to make sure that the neighborhoods, every part of the city is getting some amount of street paving maintenance and not being left out. The needs are great, and the needs are essentially endless. So we can work very hard, and if weather conditions and supplies are there, we can get a lot of paving done, but still doesn't look like we made a dent. So it's just a matter of how much we can get done in any given year.
Member Nordic.
Thank you. I had a couple questions. When a new development goes in, let's say there's just an empty field in a part of Salem that has not yet been developed, and obviously roads will need to go in. Does the developer pay for those roads, the creation of the roads, and then we maintain them? Is that the fundamental difference?
Generally, that's the case, yeah.
Okay, great. I just want to make sure I understood that. Also, I noticed in your slides, your street pavement maintenance that is covered by Fund 155 includes 82 speed humps. I'm just curious, one of the questions I get a lot in my ward has to do, everyone wants a speed bump or a hump in their neighborhood. Every single one of them. Am I right, Councilor Matthews? We just last night. And so it's useful information for all of us as we go to these neighborhood association meetings, what kind of resources are available for asking for new speed bumps and or humps. And I know a lot of people don't understand the difference. A speed hump is less prominent. It's more gradual, so it doesn't feel like that. You know what I mean? When you go over the car, it doesn't go, like go back and forth in your car like you're riding a buck. But anyway, that's my layman's version of it. I see there's multiple people standing. I think that's my cue to start talking. Anyway, I'm just curious, because we get asked that all the time. What is the budget for not just maintaining your existing 82 speed humps, but for asking for new ones? And how do you decide, out of all these worthy candidates, on non-arterial streets, of course, because you have to have fire trucks go over the arterial streets. How do you guys decide where to put in speed bumps or humps?
Yeah, so first from a budget perspective, we have a pot of about $400,000 that came to us through some ARPA funding back here a few years ago, and we've been allocating about $100,000 a year towards speed humps or speed radar signs. There's other different measures that we can do for traffic calming. We've actually added, because of all these requests, as part of the 155 budget that's included this year, we haven't added, $100,000 of the 19 million or whatever Mark has in that budget is an additional 100,000 that we can apply to speed humps or neighborhood traffic calming. So as long as we can keep that there, we'll have a couple of years, but we'll have approximately $200,000 we can spend. But after that ARPA funding runs out, then we'll just be back to the 100,000 in this fund.
So how many speed bumps or humps do you get with $100,000 approximately?
Yeah, you could get about 20 speed humps.
20.
They're about $5,000 a piece.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. And again, how do you decide? I mean, do you have a scoring process? You have something to make this a little more objective?
Absolutely. We have a neighborhood traffic management program where people can request speed humps, stop signs, traffic radar signs. This is a program that we just adjusted about a year and a half ago, and we've actually added arterial streets, neighborhood arterial or collector streets to it. And what we're seeing is a lot of the requests are coming in on these higher volume streets, which makes sense because that's where people are driving faster and there's more cars. The remedy for those instead of a speed hump is what's called a speed cushion, which is really just a speed hump with wheel cutouts for fire engines, emergency vehicles to get through. So you'll see a lot of those up in Portland. So there are more opportunities for installing those as well.
Thank you. And thanks for mentioning the speed humps with the wheel space. I know right along with Salem Fire on New Year's Eve, we had quite a discussion about how speed humps and bumps slow response time for at least fire. I'm not sure if police has the same issues, but maybe we could get a little info on that at some point, not tonight. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So before you leave, as Many of you are already getting, my neighborhood associations are constantly asking for the speed cushions. You might explain how it requires 3 in a row, and that then that adds up, so that, again, the money doesn't go, the money goes fast. I just want to say that because everybody wants one on their street, but it's not just one. It's like a series to really get the vehicles to slow down. And then once you've answered that, I have some additional questions.
Yeah, that's correct. Just one speed hump on a street is going to slow people down one time. If you have them in a certain sequence, you can actually get more benefit to slow people down on that entire street. So it's an excellent point. So if you're going to go do a street, you're looking at a minimum of $15,000 to get those 3 speed humps in.
Thank you. So now I'm going to talk about sidewalks. And no one has currently reminded us how many years it would take to repair, install, and infill the current needs that we have.
Well, I couldn't begin to tell you how long it would take to fill in the areas where we have missing sidewalks, because so much of that is related to development, redevelopment of properties, bond measures, and things like that. As far as repairing the sidewalk system, the sidewalks that we have, the 826 miles that we have, theoretically, at the rate we're repairing them, it would take us 20 years to get through that initial, inventory of defects. But in 20 years, you will have gained, more defects from the dynamic changes in time. So the only thing that would change in 20 years is that we would, under the current code, we would only be repairing sidewalks damaged by city-owned street trees. All the other types of causes would be covered by abutting property owners. But I will tell you that at least 3/4 of all of the damage to sidewalks is caused by trees. So it really is kind of an endless cycle.
I know that it was, I was getting a lot of questions again from my neighborhood associations about repairing sidewalks, and that was about 1.5 years ago when I met, and I had learned at that time it was going to take about 400 years to do all the sidewalks, so I'm glad to hear 20.
Well, that is simply just using math as a calculation. There's all sorts of things that impact the rate at which we can repair sidewalks. We have to slow down in the wintertime. If it's a really bad winter, we get less done. We run into issues with frontages that have a lot of very large trees. We try to save the trees and not take them down. So that sometimes requires us to do additional mitigation measures that slow down the progress. So 20 years, I really would not like to have people quote me that in 20 years, the sidewalk system will be perfect, because it won't be. But at the rate we're going mathematically, we would be there, but not.
Well, that is actually good news. The last thing I want to say is the suggested 4% fuel tax that might be something to consider. I agree is a very regressive tax, and I would like to see if we could find other ways. I think we're still relying so much on the state with how to tax to support the streets, whether or not it is on the way to vehicles or EVs or however they're going to do it. But we're going to be sitting around waiting for that, I think. I do like Member Cohen's suggestion about a vehicle safety fee. I think that would be. We're already, I don't know how many times people are saying people are not getting the registration done, and that there's a lot of vehicles that their tags are out of date, and it might even be a way to make sure that all of that is happening. It's just a thought.
One moment, Member Manville. Rich conversation, don't want to discourage it. And I want to remind people that it's 9:30, and we still have some more agenda to get through. So just keep that in mind, but go ahead, Member Manville.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I was suggesting something, sort of wrapping it up. And in my mind, it feels that of our 23, 24 funds, the transportation fund and the general fund are the ones with the biggest problems. And I just want to, I'm seeing a nod from the city manager. So this is very much a to-do. It's not quite as urgent as the general fund, but this is something that the council, because it's going to require additional revenue, needs to put on their front burners, is what I'm seeing, and we're here to support. So thank you very much for laying this out so clearly. And I would say, 30 cities, like a lot of cities have already done this, and we're behind schedule on this, and it's causing us costs.
Other comments or questions for this section of the agenda? I don't see any. Thank you very much for your presentation. I concur with Member Curtis that it was very well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to item 7C of the agenda. This is for the committee for questions for staff of any of the funds presented or provided to us in the forecast documents, or any items not on the agenda. So this would be your catch-all for questions. I think, and I'm sure there will be some, I think we need to make sure that we make it clear whether or not we're expecting answers tonight, or whether these are questions that we want staff to research and get back to us on. Member Dixon.
This is just a couple of comments related to the Budget Efficiencies Committee that the council authorized the other night. There are a couple of areas that I hope they will look into. And I am aware that the work they do will interface with the work we do and affect the budget that comes to us, and that's why I'm presenting these. One is currently there's $1 billion in excess property value that sits in 6 urban renewal areas that will be at least 20 years old in 2026. The property taxes from this excess value are not available for use to finance the general fund. The question is, would it be more efficient from a financial and operational health standpoint to return this excess value to the general fund tax rolls, producing a gain of $5 to $6 million annually in operating revenue? And again, this is not something I expect an answer on tonight. I just hope that that committee will address that issue. The second one is workload imbalances are a significant problem for the city operation. Managers cite overwork as a result of and a contributor to staff vacancies. And staff vacancies have helped to drive overtime costs up 300% in 10 years. The effects have been felt especially by human resources, information technology, fire, police, the library, and public works. The question is, how can the city bring staff workload more into congruence with staff capacity? And those are the two questions. Thank you.
Member Geyer.
Thank you, Chair. My question is along the same with Member Diskin, and has to do with what happened on the last council meeting. So this question is mainly for council members with that advisory committee that was voted on. Now, I believe it's made up of HBA and the Chamber of Commerce, but I'm not sure who those people are or how they're going to be selected. And that gives me concerns, because they're going to be advising us, and I don't know really where those people come from, what their agendas are, what their concerns are. If they're home builders, they probably want to build more homes. They probably want less permits. Is that where their cuts are going to come from? I have concerns. And I just don't know how those people are going to be selected. Are they just on the board of the HBA, and that's why they get to advise? How are they on the board of the HBA? A lot of questions and a lot of concerns, especially something that happened very, short amount of time. And I understand that's the council's, you guys, the motions that can be passed. A lot of concerns about, what their ideas are going to be, what their agendas are. And I hope that we could see more of what that committee is made up of, not just, hey, this advisory committee, they spent 60 hours, we paid them for 60 hours. This is what they came up with. Deal with it. I don't like how that's looking right now.
Would the staff or the mayor like to make any comment on that?
Just a clarification, you said they're being paid, is that right?
I believe you guys, it was 60 hours, I think is what was talked about in that motion.
It's the limit of time.
Okay.
Not a payable.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
A lot of information that we have no idea about.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I would like to have that information.
CFO.
If I may, just a couple quick things. There will be more that comes out about this fairly rapidly, and we'll make sure you guys are informed and know when the meetings are, and you're welcome to attend. We had a meeting today with the home builders and chamber, so their direct boards or staff will not be participating. So we're jointly selecting members for presentation to the Finance Committee for approval. So it's people in the community with large organizations that operate large budgets with a lot of financial experience that will be serving on this group. So I'm pretty optimistic about the outcome. They might not find anything, but regardless, we're going to have some good minds working on it.
Over here.
While we're just talking about this and discussing concerns and hopes for that committee, I would also love to learn more about the scope of what they'll discuss and what they'll be able to discuss and encouraged to discuss. My concern is, I think it made sense for our forecast review team to discuss things like PERS and COLAs, to be able to understand those things and predict and make assessments about the future. I would hope that a committee that is largely made up of private employers don't have purview over those things, are not discussing those things, are not making recommendations about things that are negotiated during bargaining.
Over here.
Just for clarity, the city is responsible for writing the scope for the committee, and those things would be outside scope.
Please.
Yeah, thank you. So, just a little more background, please. This is a committee that was formed Monday night to advise the budget committee, which exists to provide recommendations to city council. Is that the chain of advice here?
If I may, so the city council formed the committee, so it's advisory to the city council. So whatever their final recommendation is based on the scope would return to the city council, of course. I just said I'd keep you informed of the outcome, so you'll have the meeting materials, similar to the revenue task force, and the final recommendation. Of course, it would be incorporated into, after city council reviews it, it could be incorporated into the budget.
But Josh, that's a public meeting, though, that people can attend, and it will be online as well? Is that correct?
It will at least be a public meeting. I'm not sure if it needs to be online, but regardless, we'll choose the room according to projected attendance.
Member Dixon.
Another question on the makeup of the committee. I believe for the revenue task force, the council set the ground rules. And I think I'm hearing that the council's finance committee will determine the membership and the ground rules for this committee. There seems to be a discontinuity there, and I'd like some explanation for that.
I anticipate coming forward to the Finance Committee with a recommended slate for their consideration.
Member Manuel.
To pivot, if I may, unless other people want to talk more about that. So it feels that the next meeting is not until April, and the city manager is going to have a proposed budget then. I found it useful last year to have some options. There were 4 options last year, and I'd like to make a motion to direct the city manager to build a fiscal year 2026 budget scenario option that includes roughly proportional cuts to library, parks, recreation services, police, and fire.
I'll second that motion.
To the motion?
So go ahead and speak to your motion.
Thank you. I don't envy the city staff work. I don't really know how you're going to manage to make sense of the survey Moss Adams did, or what we said at our meeting last time about our collective priorities. It's kind of like reading the tea leaves, and we've got a couple new people, so you add some coffee grounds into the mix, that are missing. So it's going to be tough. What I'd like to see is your best take at your budget, your recommended budget, of course, but I'd also like to see an option that does roughly proportional cuts. We've seen over the last decade, and I presented this at the last budget committee, just a higher and higher percentage of our budget being eaten up by police and fire. They're critical. They're our number one priority. That's why they're most of our budget. They're also an order of magnitude higher, roughly, than parks and library. So I want to make sure that we at least consider an option where we don't continue to avoid cuts that are hard across the board. That we look at what that might look like. Now, I've done ride-alongs with fire and police. I've talked to the library folks. I work professionally with the community development people who are some of the best in the state. We've got really quality staff doing great work, and I will want to fully fund it all. But that's not going to be possible. So I'd like to have it outlined what an option with roughly proportional cuts across the board. I mentioned that the largest ones, and I trust the city manager can kind of fill in the gaps for the smaller pieces. But that would be really helpful for me in April and May as we're considering potential budget scenarios and making a recommended budget.
Okay, there's a motion on the floor. Comments or questions? Well, actually, let's start with Mr. City Manager. Might be illustrative.
At 9:47, I'm not sure how illustrative I'll be, but in regards to Member Manville's proposal, that it's a reasonable request. Josh and I were talking about that earlier today, what we anticipate coming forward with. Of course, I will present a single budget and a recommended budget to the Budget Committee in April, but there will be scenarios. One, can be the Manville proposal. Two will be a proposal if a revenue measure is placed on the ballot, we'll have a scenario that would indicate, okay, what would the budget look like with this additional funding, so we can understand what that would look like. The budget that we will be proposing will be a budget that does not reflect additional funding. Unless there are specific funding sources that are within council control that we know are operational and will be operational on July 1st. Other than that, there will be no additional revenues included in the budget that I propose, whether there's a measure on the ballot or not. So we will have an understanding of what that budget would look like should the measure pass, or the proposed budget will indicate a budget that doesn't include that. And then we can present the equal treatment, the proportional approach also.
Am I understanding it correctly that without the motion, the staff will include information with regards to the Manville budget? Or would you like the motion to continue?
Sure.
Okay.
Since the motion was made,
okay.
We might as well carry it to its conclusion.
All right, sure. Member Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to be sure that I set you up for success. This is not about the motion that's on the floor, but it's roughly 6 minutes till 9:55. And if we don't conclude, you'll have to have another motion to go beyond 10 o'clock.
I asked the question to the city manager, and I was told that this meeting doesn't have a hard cap.
Really?
Really? So I checked on that 30 minutes ago.
Unfortunately, that is incorrect.
We need a cap.
Let's put a cap on this thing.
I'm being corrected here.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
There is a 10 o'clock limit. After that, there has to be a motion to extend the meeting by 30 minutes.
All right. I work with the information I'm given.
Oh, that's okay. But I'm looking out for you. That's all.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Just looking out for another brother. That's all.
Okay. All right. Are there any other discussion on the motion that's on the floor? Mr. Member Manville?
Just to be clear, it's not necessarily something I would support. It's something I'm using for information. So please don't call it the Manville budget proposal.
Seeing no other comments on the motion, all those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. Okay. register the 1 no, I believe. The motion passes. Are there any other questions or concerns or for staff? Questions? Member Nordyke?
I move to adjourn.
There's a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Is there any comment, any conversation for this motion? Hearing none. All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously.